Mayor Cyrus Vane kicked the handcart so hard that the man strapped inside pitched forward and cracked his forehead on the rail, and the whole of Dry Creek laughed. Vane didn't help him up. He put one polished boot on the cart's edge, leaned over the bleeding man like he was inspecting a hog at market, and shouted so the back row could hear him. "Last prize of the day, folks! 240 pounds of dead weight that used to be the greatest tracker on this plane. Can't walk. Can't work. Can't pay his board at the boarding house anymore." He lifted a folded slip of paper high above his head. "So the town's giving him away, free, to whichever unlucky soul draws this ticket." And then he smiled straight at the fattest woman in the crowd. If a story ever made you angry enough to keep watching, this is that story. So hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens after that ticket is drawn is nothing anybody in Dry Creek expected. And drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Hattie Boone had not wanted to come to the Founders Day gathering at all. She'd told herself 6 times that morning that she was staying home. She had a fence line down on the north quarter, and a heifer that wouldn't take feed, and a roof that leaked in exactly the spot where she slept, and none of those things cared about Founders Day. But Elias had loved this day. 14 years they'd come together, and for the 2 years since she'd buried him, she had come alone, standing at the back with her hands folded, listening to the fiddle, and letting herself remember what it felt like to be part of something. That was the trouble with her. She kept showing up in places that had stopped wanting her. She'd been standing near the water trough by the feed store when Vane started in on the raffles. First it was a saddle nobody wanted, then a hog, then a barrel of nails from the mercantile that Odell Ferris couldn't move because half of them were bent. The crowd was loose and warm and half drunk on cider, and Vane worked them the way a man works a green horse, easy at first, then harder once he felt them give. Then 2 of his men wheeled out the handcart. Hattie didn't recognize the man in it at first. She had seen Ronan Blackridge maybe 4 times in her life, always from a distance, always the same picture. A huge man on a huge horse coming down off the ridge with a string of pelts and the look of somebody who had gone where nobody else would go. People told stories about him. Some of them were probably true. The man in the cart had a beard gone wild and a blanket over his legs and hands the size of dinner plates, and when the cart tipped and he went down on the boards, he caught himself on those hands and pushed himself back up without making a sound. That was what got her. Not the blood on his eyebrow. The silence. "Now hold on, Vane called out over the laughing. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Mayor, that's cruel. That's a man." He put his hand over his heart. "It is. And this town has carried him 7 months. 7 months of Mrs. Pruitt hauling his slop bucket. 7 months of the county paying his keep out of the road fund. Now I've got a road that needs grading between here and the fork, and I've got no money to grade it, and I'll tell you why." "Tell it, Cyrus," somebody yelled. "Because we are feeding a man who cannot stand up." He said it flat, like a bookkeeper reading a column. So the town council voted Tuesday. Whoever draws this ticket takes him home, feeds him, keeps him. County pays $4 a month toward his board, and the rest is on you. That's charity, folks. That's what Founders Day is for. Somebody said loud, "That ain't charity, that's a curse." The laughter came up again, and it was uglier this time. Hattie felt her face go hot, and she hated that. She'd been laughed at enough to know the sound of a crowd turning. It had a particular pitch to it. She'd heard that pitch at her own wedding, from the back pews, and at Elias's funeral, from 2 men standing by the wagons who thought she couldn't hear them say, "Well, he ate himself to death trying to keep up with her." She started to turn away. She had a fence line down. That's what she told herself. "Mrs. Boone!" The whole crowd swung around. Vane was pointing at her with the folded ticket, grinning like they were old friends. "Hattie Boone, don't you go running off." He came down off the boards of the wagon and walked toward her, and people stepped back to make him a lane, and there she was, standing alone at the end of it, with 300 pairs of eyes on her. "You're a widow with a full section of grass and no man on it. Seems to me you're exactly the sort of Christian-hearted woman this town ought to be leaning on." "I've got no room for a boarder, Mayor." "No?" He looked her up and down, slow, taking his time about it, and the crowd started to snicker before he even said it. "Well, there's a good deal of room in some directions." Somebody near the cider barrel laughed so hard he choked. Hattie stood there. Her hands were folded in front of her the way she always folded them, and she made herself keep them still, because the one thing she would not give any of them was the sight of her shaking. "That's an unkind thing to say," she said. "It's a joke, Mrs. Boone. Take a joke." Vane turned back to the crowd, arms wide. "All right, fair's fair. Everybody who bought a raffle ticket today is in the hat. One draw. No takebacks." Sheriff Tuck Mallory held the hat. He was a soft, worried man who had never once in 9 years done a hard thing, and he held that hat out at arm's length like it might bite him. Vane reached in, made a show of stirring, pulled out a slip. "Number 41. And here's the part Hattie would think about for the rest of her life. She had not bought a ticket. She had never once in 2 years bought a raffle ticket, because a raffle ticket cost a dime, and a dime was 2 boxes of matches. She said so. She said, "I didn't buy a ticket," and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Vane's smile didn't move a hair. "Sure you did. Ferris sold it to you this morning. Didn't you, Odell?" Odell Ferris looked at his shoes. Odell Ferris, who had extended her credit twice that winter, who had a wife and 4 children and a note held by the Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association, of which Mayor Cyrus Vane was president. Odell said. "That's right. Number 41. Sold it to Mrs. Boone." The crowd roared. It was the roar that did it. Not Vane, not Ferris, the roar. Men she'd fed at harvest, women she'd sat up with through fevers, a boy she'd pulled out of the creek when he was 6 and was now 17 and laughing with his head thrown back. Ronan Blackridge spoke for the first time. "Vane." It wasn't loud. It cut through anyway, low and rough, the voice of a man who hadn't used it much lately. "Yes, Mr. Blackridge." "I'd sooner you shot me." The crowd went quiet in patches, the way a field goes quiet. Vane spread his hands. "Now that is exactly the ingratitude I've been dealing with all winter. You put me in a cart. I put you where you could be seen. There's a difference." Vane straightened his coat. "Mrs. Boone, he's yours. Cart's yours too, that's the county's gift. $4 a month, first of the month. Come to the office and sign." And that was when Hattie Boone did the thing that nobody in Dry Creek was ready for. She walked forward. She had to walk the whole length of that lane they'd made for her, and she felt every step of it, and she knew what she looked like walking. She had known what she looked like walking since she was 11 years old. Her heart was going so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stopped at the handcart. She looked down at the man in it. His eyebrow was still bleeding. His eyes came up to meet hers, and there was nothing in them like gratitude. There was a kind of fury in there that had been banked down so long it had turned into something else, something patient and terrible. "Mr. Blackridge," she said, "my name's Hattie Boone. I've got a spare room, a stove that works, and no husband to object. I'll not pretend it's charity, and I'll not pretend I want a stranger in my house. But I'm not leaving a man in a cart in the street so a crowd can look at him." "I don't want your pity." "Good," Hattie said. "I've got none to spare. I've been living off my own." Something moved in his face. Not a smile. Closer to surprise. She looked up at the crowd, and she found that she wasn't shaking anymore. "Somebody help me get him in the wagon." Nobody moved. 300 people, and not one of them moved. "Sheriff?" Tuck Mallory examined the hat. "Mr. Ferris?" Odell Ferris turned around and walked into his own store. "Well," Hattie said, and her voice cracked once and she got it back. "All right." She'd loaded feed sacks by herself for 2 years. She'd loaded a dead calf into a wagon bed in February by herself. She backed her wagon up to the boardwalk and she set the tailgate down, and she came around and got her arms under Ronan Blackridge, and he said, "Don't." And she said, "Then help me." And after a second he did. He got his hands on the rail and hauled, and she took the dead weight of his legs and his hips, and it was not smooth, and it was not graceful, and it took 4 tries. On the 3rd try, she slipped and went down on one knee on the boardwalk, and somebody behind her made a noise like an animal, and the laughter started up fresh. Ronan's hand caught her arm, enormous, hard as a fence post. "Get up," he said quietly. "Don't let them see you on the ground." She got up. The 4th try got him in. She threw the blanket over him herself. She climbed up on the seat, which took her a moment and a good grip on the brake handle, and she got the lines in her hands, and she did not look back at Dry Creek. Not once. She heard somebody yell something about a matched pair. She heard Vane call out, cheerful as a church bell, "First of the month, Mrs. Boone." She clucked to the mules and drove out of town at a walk, because running would have been worse, and a walk took 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time to be laughed at. They were 2 miles out before either of them said anything. "You could put me down at the creek crossing," Ronan said, "and leave you there." "That's right. You'd die." "That's right." Hattie kept her eyes on the mules. "Then you'd have got what you wanted, and I'd have got what I deserved, and neither one of us would have to live with it long. No. You don't know me." "I know Vane," she said. "That's enough for today." He was quiet a while. The wagon rattled. Then, "Why'd he pick you?" "He didn't pick me. It was a draw." "Mrs. Boone." He said her name like a man setting a rock down carefully. "That was no draw." She didn't answer. She'd known it since Odell Ferris looked at his shoes. She'd just been holding it off, the way you hold off a cramp. "He called your number before he unfolded the paper," Ronan said. "I was 2 feet from his hand. He never opened it." Hattie's jaw tightened. Why would a mayor go to that trouble to embarrass a widow? "He didn't go to that trouble to embarrass you." Ronan shifted his weight with his arms, hissing through his teeth. "A man like that doesn't spend a public humiliation on nothing. He's buying something with it." "Buying what?" "That," Ronan said, "is what I've been lying in a boarding house for 7 months trying to work out." They came over the last rise at dusk, and Hattie's place spread out below them, and she felt the old sick lurch of seeing it through somebody else's eyes. The barn's east side had a sag in it. The corral had been patched with 3 different kinds of wire. The house was small, and the porch listed, and the yard was clean. That was the one thing. The yard was swept clean because sweeping was the only thing she could still do that made anything look cared for. "It's not much," she said, and then hated herself for saying it. "It's standing," Ronan said. "You do it alone?" 2 years. "How many head?" 31. Was 64. "What happened to the other 33? "Winter happened to 11, Hattie said. "The Land and Cattle Association happened to the rest." Getting him out of the wagon and into the house took 40 minutes. And it was, Hattie thought later, the single most undignified thing that had ever happened to either of them. They tried it with her under his arm, and that failed because he was 6'4" and she couldn't get a base under him. They tried it with a plank as a ramp, and the plank cracked. He fell twice. The second time he landed hard on his shoulder in the dirt and lay there breathing, and she knelt down beside him in the dark and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this." And he said through his teeth, "Neither do I. That's the hell of it." And something about the way he said it, flat, disgusted, almost funny, broke the awfulness of it just enough. "Are you hurt?" "Can't feel it if I am." A pause. "That's supposed to be a joke." "It's a poor one. I'm out of practice." In the end, she brought the wheelbarrow. She said, "I'm going to say a thing and you're going to hate it. Say it. I've got a barrow that hauls 200 pounds of wet sand. If you can get yourself into it, I can get you to the door." Ronan Blackridge stared at the wheelbarrow for a long moment. "Mrs. Boone." "I know." "A wheelbarrow." "I know. 7 months ago I put a bear down at 40 yards in a blizzard." "And tonight you're going to ride in a barrow," Hattie said, "or you're going to sleep in the yard, and I'm too tired to argue with a man about his pride when my own's been in the street all afternoon." He laughed. It surprised them both. It came out of him like something breaking loose, one hard, ugly bark of a laugh, and he put the heel of his hand over his eyes and shook his head. "Bring the barrow," he said. She got him in the house. She got him into Elias's old chair by the stove because the spare room wasn't ready and wouldn't be until she got the mice out of it. She built up the fire, and she put on beans and salt pork and cornbread, and when she set the plate in front of him, she saw him look at it too long. "When'd you last eat?" "Yesterday." "They fed you at the boarding house." "Mrs. Pruitt fed me when she remembered." He picked up the fork. "Vane stopped paying her in April. She kept me on out of her own pocket till last week, and then her son came and told her she was a fool." "That's a hard thing to hear about your neighbors." "You'd know." Hattie sat down across from him with her own plate and did not touch it, which was a thing she did in front of people and had done in front of people for 30 years. "Eat later. Eat alone. Don't give anybody the show." Ronan noticed. She saw him notice. He didn't say anything about it, and she was so unaccountably grateful for that she had to look at the stove for a second. "How'd it happen?" she asked. "If you'll say." "Rock slide. Above the Ute Fork, end of last October." He ate like a man rationing himself. I was cutting a line for a survey crew, got paid to walk country, nobody else would walk and put stakes where they told me. Whole face of the ridge came off. Killed a man named Tobin. Broke my back. Who found you? Nobody found me. He set the fork down. I dragged myself 4 miles to the wagon road with my hands. Took a day and a half. Then a freighter named Teal picked me up and hauled me to Dry Creek, and that's where I've been. Hattie sat very still. 4 miles. 2, maybe. Felt like 40. He picked the fork back up. Anyway, that's the story people like. That's not the interesting part. What's the interesting part? The interesting part, Ronan said, is who I was surveying for. The fire popped. Outside, one of the mules blew. The Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association, he said. Cyrus Vane, president. And what he had me marking wasn't a road line. What was it? Water. Hattie's hands went cold in her lap. He had me walking every seep and spring and creek head from the Ute Fork down to the flats, Ronan said. Not the ones on the map, the ones that aren't on the map. And he had me writing down whose deed each one sat on. He looked up. There's a spring on the north end of your section. Feeds a draw that runs down to a stock pond. There is. It doesn't dry. It's never dried, Hattie said. Elias used to say it was the only reliable thing he ever owned besides me. It's the only water that doesn't quit between here and the fork, Ronan said. I walked all of it. Yours is the one. Hattie stood up. She didn't decide to. She just found herself standing, with her hands on the back of the chair. He offered to buy me out in March, she said, twice. Once at 400, once at 350 when I said no the first time. What's the section worth? Elias paid 1,100 for it in 68. Ronan nodded slowly. So he's not buying land? No. He's buying the spring, and he's buying it cheap. And to get it cheap, he needs you broke or gone or so beat down you'd sign anything to be let alone. He pushed his plate an inch away. And today he handed you a cripple to feed. Cost you nothing to say no, and you said yes, and now you've got another mouth on a place that's already 33 head short. Hattie's throat had gone tight. So he did pick me. He picked you, see. And he picked you. He picked me, Ronan agreed, because I'm the only man alive who knows what's in that survey book, and because a man in a wheelbarrow can't ride to the county seat and tell anybody. She sat back down, slowly. Where's the book? That, said Ronan Blackridge, is a better question than you know. They talked till the fire went down to coals. He told her the crew had been 6 men, and that after the slide there had been 4, and by Christmas there had been 2. Tobin dead under the rock. A man named Halloran gone to Cheyenne. One hand who'd quit and drifted. Another who'd taken a job with the association at double wages and stopped speaking to anybody. He told her Vane had come to the boarding house in November and sat on the end of his bed and asked him, in the friendliest voice you ever heard, whether he remembered much about the survey. On account of a head injury like that, a man's memory can go. He told her he'd said, "Not a thing, Mayor," and Vane had patted his blanket over the place where his legs were and said, "That's a mercy," and left. "And you've been playing dumb 7 months. "I've been playing dead 7 months, Ronan said. "It's easier. People believe it." "Why tell me?" He looked at her a long moment. "Because you walked down that lane," he said. "I watched 300 people laugh at you, and I watched you walk anyway. A man doesn't see that twice." Hattie got up and put another stick on the fire so she wouldn't have to answer. "You should know," she said with her back to him, "that I'm not what they said, and I'm not what you're thinking either. I don't work hard because I'm noble. I work hard because if I stop, nobody comes. There's a difference, and I'd rather you had it straight." "I had it straight when I saw the yard." "The yard?" "Barns failing, corrals wire, and the yard swept." Ronan shrugged with his shoulders, the only part of him that shrugged. "A person who sweeps a yard she's about to lose is a person who hasn't quit. I know that one. I've been that one." She stood at the stove with her hand on the cold end of the poker and didn't trust herself to turn around. She put him in the spare room at midnight, mice and all, after 2 more failures and one moment where they both nearly went into the door frame, and he said, "Left, left, left, you're going to take my ear off." And she said, "You have got a mouth on you for a man in a barrow." And he said, "It's all I've got left, don't take it." She hauled water, she banked the fire. She put a chair by his bed with a candle and a cup on it, and she said, "There's a bell on the string there. Elias rigged it when he was sick. Pull it if you need me." "I won't need you." "Pull it anyway if you do." At the door she stopped. "Mr. Blackridge, if what you say is true, then he'll come out here." "He'll come." "Soon?" "Not soon. He'll wait." Ronan's voice came out of the dark, even and certain. "He'll give it a month or two for you to find out what I cost. Feed, laundry, lamp oil, the time it takes you to haul me around instead of working. He wants you to come to him. It's cleaner that way. Nobody makes a martyr out of a woman who sold her own place." "Then I won't come to him." "Mrs. Boone." Something in his voice changed. "You should think about it before you say that so fast. I've thought about it for 2 years. You've thought about being poor. That's not the same as being wrecked." Hattie stood in the doorway with the candle. "My husband died in the 3rd week of April," she said. "The association had a note on our cattle. Vane came out here on the 9th of May with the sheriff, and a bill of sale that Elias never signed, and I couldn't prove he never signed it, and they took 33 head off my grass while I stood on that porch, and Tuck Mallory would not look at me." Her voice stayed level the whole way through. "So no, I've been wrecked. I know what it costs. I'm telling you I won't come to him." There was a long silence from the bed. "All right," Ronan said. "All right." "Mrs. Boone." "What?" "That barrow," he said. "Give me 2 weeks and a forge, and I'll build you something better than that barrow." She almost laughed. "There's no forge. There's a shed with Elias's tools in it, and half of them are rusted through." "Is there an anvil?" "There's an anvil." "Then there's a forge," said Ronan Blackridge. "Give or take some work." Hattie closed the door. She stood in her own kitchen in the dark for a long time. Then she sat down at the table and ate the plate of beans she hadn't touched, cold, alone, the way she'd eaten for 2 years. And about halfway through, she put down the fork and put both hands over her face and let herself shake for exactly as long as it took the coals to settle. Then she stopped and washed the plate and went to bed. In town, at that same hour, Cyrus Vane was sitting in the back room of the Land and Cattle office with a whiskey and a ledger, and Sheriff Tuck Mallory was standing in front of the desk with his hat in his hands. "That was ugly today, Cyrus. That was efficient. Folks are talking. Folks always talk. Question is what they say next month." Vane turned a page. "By August, that woman will have spent every cent she's got on salt pork and lamp oil for a man who can't lift a bucket. She'll come in here on her own 2 feet and ask me for $400, and I'll offer her 3, and she'll take it, and nobody in this town will feel one thing about it except relieved." "And Blackridge?" "Blackridge is a dead man who hasn't got the manners to lie down." Vane drank. "Out there he's nobody's business. In town he was in the street where a lawyer from the county seat might trip over him." Mallory turned his hat another quarter turn. "There's one thing." "Say it." "Teal." Vane looked up. "The freighter. The one that hauled him in off the Fork Road." Mallory swallowed. "He come in the Mercantile Thursday and asked Odell whether anybody'd ever come around asking for Blackridge's kit. Said he still had a satchel of the man's out of the wagon bed. Said he'd been meaning to hand it over for 7 months and kept forgetting." The room got very quiet. "A satchel," Vane said. "That's what he said." "Where's Teal now?" "Hauling to sublet. Back end of the month, likely." Cyrus Vane closed the ledger and set his glass down, and when he smiled, it was not the smile he used on the boardwalk. "Tuck," he said, "sit down. We're going to talk about the end of the month." Out at the Boone place, Hattie woke at first light out of habit and lay there a full minute remembering there was a man in her house. She got up. She built the fire. She put the coffee on. And when she went past the spare room door, she heard a sound she couldn't place at first. A scraping, a grunt, a thud, a long pause, and then the scraping again. She opened the door. Ronan Blackridge was on the floor. He'd got himself out of the bed and down onto the boards, and he was dragging himself across the room on his forearms toward the window, and he was maybe 4 feet from it, and the look on his face when the door opened was pure fury. "Don't," he said. "I wasn't going to." "I've been at it since 4. "I can see that." "I want to see the barn," he said. "I want to see it from here so I can figure the sag in it, and I'm not asking anybody to carry me to a window in my own—" He stopped. "In your house. In your house." Hattie stood in the doorway with the coffee pot still in her hand. "You want the chair by the window," she said. "I want to get there myself." "Then get there," she said. "I'll be in the kitchen. Coffee's on. Pull the bell if you don't want it cold." She shut the door. She stood outside it and listened to the scraping start up again, and then she went and drank her coffee standing at the counter, and she found she was doing a thing she hadn't done since Elias. She was making 2 plates. It took him 51 minutes to reach the window. He pulled the bell. When she came in, he was sitting propped against the wall under the sill, gray in the face, shirt soaked through, breathing like a run horse, and he pointed one shaking finger up at the glass. "Get me in that chair," he said, "and then go stand by the barn's east corner and tell me if the sill's rotted or if the ground's sunk. Because if it's the ground, that's a day's work with a jack and a rock. And if it's the sill, that barn's coming down on your 31 head this winter, and we'd best know it in July." Hattie Boone looked at him a long moment. "We," she said. Ronan Blackridge held her eye and didn't take it back. "Get the jack," he said. The jack was under the wagon seat where Elias had left it 2 Julys ago, and it took Hattie 10 minutes of prying to get it loose from the rust. She carried it out to the barn's east corner and set it down and stood there with her hands on her hips, and she could feel Ronan watching her from the window of the spare room, 40 yards off, propped in the chair she'd wrestled him into. "Well," he hollered, his voice carried fine. Whatever the rock slide had taken, it hadn't taken that. "Well, what? Is the sill wet, or is the ground low?" "It's a barn corner, Mr. Blackridge. It's a barn corner the way it's been a barn corner for 11 years. Put your thumb in it." "Put my thumb in what?" "The sill. Bottom log. Push your thumbnail into it and tell me what it does." Hattie crouched, which was its own piece of work, and she was glad the only witness was 40 yards away and looking at wood, and she pressed her thumb into the underside of the beam where it met the stone. Her nail went in like it was going into a bar of soap. She sat back on her heel. "Mrs. Boone." "It's soft," she called. "How soft?" "Soft." "Say it plain." "My thumb went into the knuckle." There was a silence from the window. "All right," Ronan said. "Get me out there." "It's 40 yards and there's no path and the barrow's got a flat wheel." "Then fix the wheel." "The wheel's not the—" She stopped because she'd heard her own voice getting shrill and she didn't like the sound of it. She started over. "Mr. Blackridge, it is 9 o'clock in the morning. I have not fed the stock. I have not milked. I have 31 head on a section that ought to run 60, and I have got 1 hour of daylight in me for every 4 hours of work I need to do. I cannot spend the morning hauling a 240-pound man across a yard in a barrow so he can put his own thumb in the same rotten log." The silence from the window went longer this time. "Fair," Ronan said. "Thank you." "Feed your stock." "I intend to. But bring me the auger out of that shed when you come in, and a saw. And whatever nails Elias had that aren't rusted, and if they're all rusted, bring them anyway. I'll straighten them." Hattie stood up and wiped her thumb on her apron and looked at the window a long time. "You can't get to the shed," she said. "No." "You can't get to the barn." "No." "So what exactly is it you think you're going to do with an auger in a bedroom?" "I'm going to make a thing that gets me to the shed," Ronan said. "And then I'm going to make a thing that gets me to the barn. And then I'm going to fix your barn. In that order, and it's going to take longer than either one of us likes. And I'd be obliged if you'd stop telling me what I can't reach, because I have got a very complete list already." She brought him the auger. The first week nearly killed her. She'd have said before that she knew what tired was. She'd buried a husband and run a section alone through a winter that took 11 head and a spring that took 33 more. She'd learned to sleep in 90-minute pieces during calving. She thought she'd been to the bottom of it. She had not accounted for a second body in the house. There was water, twice what she'd been hauling, because he drank like a man who'd been thirsty for 7 months. And because there was washing now, real washing, sheets and shirts, and the other business that came with a man who couldn't get himself to a privy and who would rather have died than talk about it. There was wood, because he ran the stove hot working at night. There was cooking twice a day instead of once, and there was the bed to change, and there was the thing nobody ever told her about, which was that every single item in the house now had to be moved to where he was, because he could not go to where it was. By Thursday, she was getting up at 3:30. By Saturday, she stopped eating breakfast to buy back the 20 minutes. On Sunday, she dropped a full bucket on the porch step and stood there in the spilled water with her hands shaking and said, out loud, to nobody, "I can't do this." The door was open behind her. She didn't know it was open. "Mrs. Boone." She turned around fast and picked up the bucket and said, "It slipped. I heard you." "It slipped, Mr. Blackridge." "You said you can't do this," Ronan said. He was on the floor just inside the door, up on his forearms, and he dragged himself the whole length of the front room to get there, and the front of his shirt was black with sweat. And you're right, you can't. Nobody could. So sit down on that step and listen to me for 4 minutes, because I have been lying in there for 6 days doing arithmetic, and I'd like to say it before you go back out. I've got 4 minutes. She sat down on the step. The water soaked into her skirt. She let it. Water? Ronan said. How many trips? 14 a day?
16 if I'm washing. From the well. From the well. How far is the well from the house? 60 steps. And the trough? The trough's another 40 past that. So you carry roughly 700 pounds of water, an average of 100 yards a day, 1 bucket at a time, in your hands. He said it like a man reading off a bill of lading.
You know what a mule does? A mule doesn't fit through my kitchen door. A mule doesn't have to. Ronan pushed himself up higher on one arm. I want you to bring me 40 feet of that wire off the corral, the old wire, the piece that's doubled, and 2 of the pulleys off the hay fork in the barn, if the barn's still got a hay fork. It's got a hay fork. Then it's got pulleys, and pulleys are the only honest thing in this world. A pulley doesn't care who's pulling. He wiped his forearm across his eyes. 60 steps to the well. If I can put a line on it, you fill at the well and you don't carry. You pull. And a woman pulling can move 4 times what a woman carrying can move, because the ground takes the weight instead of your spine. Hattie sat on the wet step. Elias talked about running a line to the well, she said. For 11 years he talked about it. Did he ever run it? No. Why not? Because there was always something more urgent, Hattie said, and then there wasn't any more time. Ronan didn't say anything to that. 40 feet of wire, she said, standing up, and the pulleys, and the auger bit, the big one, and if there's a barrel hoop out there, bring that too. What's a barrel hoop for? I don't know yet, Ronan said, but I'll want it. The line took him 9 days and it failed 4 times. The first version snapped under a full bucket and dropped 40 pounds of water on Hattie's foot. The second version worked beautifully for 2 days, and then the wire sawed through the post, and the whole business came down in the night and spooked the mules. The third version was better and slower and hung too low, so that Hattie had to duck under it every time she crossed the yard, and on the 4th day she forgot to duck, and it caught her across the forehead and put her flat on her back in the dirt. She lay there looking at the sky. Then she got up and walked into the house and stood in the doorway of the spare room with a red welt coming up over her eyebrow, and she said, "Your rope hit me in the head." Ronan looked at the welt. "That's the height," he said. "That is the height. I figured it off a man standing." "You figured it off a man 6'4", Hattie said, "and I am 5'3", and there is not one soul on this place who is 6'4" and standing." He was quiet for a second, and then he laughed. That same ugly bark of a laugh, and it went on longer this time. "You're laughing." "I'm laughing at myself, Mrs. Boone. That's a different animal." "It doesn't feel different from where I'm standing." "No," he said, wiping his face. "I don't suppose it does." He held out his hand. "Give me the tape. I'm going to measure you, and I'm going to build it to you. And I should have done that at the start, and I didn't because I've spent my whole life building for men my own size." "You're going to measure me." Something went out of her voice when she said it. He caught it. She saw him catch it. "Your reach," he said carefully. "Your shoulder height and your reach. That's all I want, and that's all I'll write down." Hattie stood in the doorway a long moment with her hand over the welt on her forehead. Then she came in and let him measure her reach. The 5th version worked. She stood at the well on a Tuesday morning and filled a bucket and hooked it to the traveler and hauled hand over hand, and the bucket came 60 steps across the yard on the wire and stopped over the kitchen barrel and tipped itself with the little iron catch he'd hammered out of a wagon bolt, and the water went in, and she stood there with the line in her hands and did not move for a full minute. "Well," he yelled from the window, "it works." "Say it louder. I've been at it 9 days." "It works? How's your back?" Hattie put a hand on the small of her back and considered. "It's the same," she said, "but it's going to be different tomorrow." "That's the whole trick of it," said Ronan Blackridge. "Nothing gets better today. Things get better tomorrow, if you're stubborn enough today." That was the good week. The bad week came right behind it, the way they do. It started with the sore. She found it changing the bed, a place on his hip, the size of $1, wrong-colored and gone soft in the middle. She'd seen the same thing on Elias's father the last winter of his life, and she knew exactly what it was and exactly what it turned into. How long has this been here? I don't know. Mr. Blackridge. I can't feel it, he snapped. That's the arrangement, Mrs. Boone. I don't feel anything below the fourth button of my shirt, so if you're asking me to keep an inventory of what's rotting off me, you'll have to wait for the parts I can see. Then I'll keep it. You will not. I will. I'm not a hog you're checking over. No, Hattie said. A hog's worth $12, and I'd hate to lose it. Roll toward the wall. Mrs. Boone, roll toward the wall. He rolled toward the wall. She cleaned it and dressed it, and she turned him every 2 hours after that, day and night, which meant she stopped sleeping in any way that resembled sleep. She'd wake in the black at 1 and at 3 and at 5 and go in and shift the weight of him with the doubled sheet he'd rigged into a sling off the bedpost and go back and lie down and stare at the ceiling for 19 minutes and get up again. On the fourth night of it, he said, into the dark, "Put me out in the barn." No. You're killing yourself over a hole in a man that can't feel it. I said no. Then I'll say the other thing. His voice was flat. I've got a straight razor in that kit Mrs. Pruitt sent along, and I have thought about it every night for 7 months. And the only reason I haven't is I couldn't stand the idea of Vane hearing about it and being right. Hattie stood in the dark by the bed with the sheet in her hands. Is that supposed to frighten me? It's supposed to be the truth. Well, she said, here's mine. When Elias died, I sat at that kitchen table for 2 days, and I did not eat, and I did not sleep, and I thought about walking out to the north draw where the water is and lying down in it, and the only thing that stopped me was I could hear the milk cow bawling. She pulled the sheet through and set his shoulder. That's it. That's the whole of it. A cow with a full bag. Not courage. Not one noble thing. Just a sound I couldn't stand. Ronan didn't say anything. So don't tell me about the razor like it's news, Hattie said. I know what it is. It's a door you look at. You look at it, and then somebody bawls and you get up. She straightened the blanket. Turn again at 5, she said, and I'm taking the razor. You can have it back when I trust you with it, and I'll shave you myself till then, and you can be as ugly about that as you like. He was ugly about it. He was ugly about it for 2 days. Then on the third day he said, sit down, and when she sat he handed her a piece of paper with a drawing on it, a low platform, 4 wheels off a broken hay rake, a hand crank, a slotted board. What is it? It's the thing that gets me of this room. You've got the barrow. The barrow is you, Ronan said. Every time I go anywhere in that barrow, it costs you. 10 minutes to load, 10 to haul, 10 to get me out, and you've got nothing left in the day. This costs you nothing. I get on it myself off the bed. I move myself with my hands. And the day I roll out that door under my own power is the day you get 11 hours back in your week. Hattie looked at the drawing. You'll need iron. I'll need iron. There's no forge. There's an anvil, and there's a fire pit, and there's a bellows if the leather's not gone. And if the leather's gone, I'll sew it, Ronan said. And I'll need you to build it, because I can't stand at a fire. You'll be my hands, and I'll be the drawings. And I'll tell you plain, Mrs. Boone, I am going to be a miserable son of a gun to work with, and I'd apologize in advance, but I don't mean it. He was not lying about that. She built the forge under his direction over the back half of August, and it was the worst 3 weeks of the summer, and she'd have said afterward that she wouldn't take $100 to do it again. He shouted at her about the fire. He shouted at her about the color of the iron. He told her twice she was ruining good stock, and once he threw a bent piece across the shed, and she picked it up and set it on the anvil in front of him and said, do that again and I'll leave you out here till dark. And he said, you wouldn't. And she said, try me. And he did not try her. But he taught her. He taught her the color of iron that's ready and the color that's spoiled. He taught her to strike where he pointed and how hard, and to listen to the anvil, because a good blow sings and a wasted one thuds. He taught her to punch a hole hot instead of drilling it cold. And somewhere in the second week she brought him a piece she'd drawn out on her own, without being told, and he turned it over in those enormous hands and looked at it for a long time. Who showed you the taper? Nobody showed me. I watched you do it 4 times. Ronan set it down. Mrs. Boone, he said, you've got a smith's eye and nobody ever told you, and I'd like to know what else this country's failed to notice about you. She turned away and put more coal on the fire so he wouldn't see her face, and burned her wrist doing it, and swore, and he laughed at her, and it was the best afternoon either of them had had in a year. The sled rolled out the door on the 11th of September. It was ugly. It was 4 feet by 2, with a plank deck and iron-shod wheels off the hay rake, and a crank on the right side that turned a chain, and it lurched and it caught on the door sill, and it took him 3 tries to get over the threshold. But he got over it. And then he was outside, under the open sky, for the first time since a freighter named Teal had hauled him into Dry Creek in October, and he sat there in the middle of the yard with his hands on the crank, and he did not say one word for a very long time. Hattie stood on the porch and let him have it. Finally he said, "Thick. It's bigger than I remembered." "What is?" "All of it." He worked that barn corner for 6 days. He couldn't lift the building, so he built a lever that lifted the building, a beam, and a fulcrum stone and a screw jack, and Hattie hauling on the long end with her whole weight while he watched the corner and called out the 1/8 inches. When it was up, he had her cut out 4 feet of the rotten sill with a crosscut saw, on her knees in the dirt, while he lay flat beside her on the sled and marked the line with a nail, because a pencil wouldn't take on wet wood. "You're going to swing that saw 1,100 times," he said, "so swing it lazy. Let the teeth do it. You're fighting it." "I'm not fighting it. You're fighting it. Look at your shoulders." He put his hand flat on her back between the shoulder blades, which neither of them remarked on then or later. "Right there. That's fight. Let it go and just move your arm." She let it go. The saw went twice as fast. "Huh," said Hattie Boone. They set the new sill on the 18th. It was a green log off the creek bottom, and it wasn't right, and Ronan said so about 9 times, but it went in, and the corner came down onto it, and the sag in the east wall closed up by 2.5 inches. And that night at supper, Hattie ate at the table across from him and did not push her plate away. She noticed she was doing it about halfway through. She stopped with the fork in the air. "What?" Ronan said. "Nothing." "You quit eating." I said nothing. "Mrs. Boone." He set down his own fork. "You've been eating in the dark like a raccoon since the day I got here, and I've said not one word about it, and I'm not going to say a word about it now, except this. In 7 months in that boarding house, I never once ate at a table with anybody. Not once." Mrs. Pruitt set it on a chair and went out. He picked his fork back up. "So if it's all the same, I'd rather you stayed." Hattie stayed. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "They started in on me when I was 11. I figured. There was a schoolmaster who'd have the class stand in a line by size for the reader, and he'd put me at the end and say, 'And the anchor,' and everybody laughed, and after a year of it, I did the thing where you laugh first." She turned the fork over. "You get good at that, laughing first. It gets to where you can hear it coming from across a room and get your laugh out ahead of theirs, and then it's your joke and it doesn't cut. That's what I was doing when Vane called my number. I was setting up to laugh first." "You didn't laugh." "No, something went wrong." She looked at her hands. "I looked at you on those boards and I thought, he's not laughing. And I thought, if he's not going to, I can't." Ronan didn't answer for a bit. "For what it's worth," he said, "Vane knew he had me the day he found out I'd rather be dead than looked at. Man like that, he doesn't need a gun. He just needs to know what you can't stand. And what he needs from you." "That's right." "So what does he need from me?" Hattie said. "Besides the spring?" "He needs your name on paper," said Ronan Blackridge. "That's all. Everything else is theater." The paper came on the 26th of September, and it came in the hand of a clerk from the county seat named Wesley Ott, a narrow young man with ink on his cuffs and a horse too good for his salary. Hattie was at the forge. She saw him coming a half-mile off, and she wiped her hands and met him in the yard, and Ronan rolled himself out of the shed door onto the packed dirt and stopped 10 feet behind her, and Ott's eyes went to him and stuck. "Ma'am, Mrs. Boone?" "That's right." "Wesley Ott, County Clerk's Office. I'm here about the indigent care arrangement." He got down and pulled a folded paper out of his satchel. "You've been drawing the $4 a month since July." "I've been drawing nothing," Hattie said. "I've never been to the office." Ott looked at the paper. He looked at her. "There's 3 payments signed out to this address, ma'am." The yard got very quiet. "Signed by who?" said Ronan. "It's a mark," Ott said. "It's an X with a witness. Mrs. Boone can write her name." "I can write my name," Hattie said, "in a fair hand, and I've never made a mark on a document in my life." Wesley Ott stood in the yard holding the paper, and Hattie watched a young man's whole face change as he did arithmetic. he did not want to be doing. Who witnessed it? Ronan said. Ott didn't answer. Son, who witnessed it? Sheriff Mallory, Ott said. Ronan rolled forward 2 turns of the crank. Give her the other paper. Sir? You've got 2 papers in that satchel. You've been holding one and looking at the other. Give her the one you don't want to. Ott's ears went red. He pulled it out. It was 1 page, and it was headed Agreement for Continued Care and Maintenance of an Indigent Person, County of Sabine, and it had a line at the bottom for Hattie's signature, and Hattie read it standing in her own yard in the low sun with the wind coming up. She got to the 4th paragraph and stopped. She read it again. Read it out, Ronan said. The undersigned, in consideration of monies advanced, does pledge and encumber the real property described in Schedule A as security for reimbursement of all sums paid or to be paid by the county or its assigns. What's Schedule A? Hattie turned the page over. It's my section, she said. Her voice had gone very small. It's my whole section, every quarter, and there's a description of the north draw down to the rod. Mr. Ott, Ronan said. Who drafted that? The county attorney. Who's the county attorney? Ott looked at the ground. Say it. Mr. Vane's brother-in-law, said Wesley Ott. Sir? Hattie folded the paper in half. Then she folded it again. Then she stood there holding it and looking out past the barn at nothing. Mr. Ott, she said. Are you an honest man? Ma'am? It's not a hard question. I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm asking whether you're honest, because those are 2 different things, and I've got no use for the second one today. Ott stood there a long moment with his hat in his hands. I'm 3 months in this job, he said. My mother's in Sublette, and I send her $9. That's not an answer. No, ma'am. It isn't. He swallowed. I'll tell you what I can do and what I can't. I can't lose this job. But I can tell you that I don't have to bring that paper back signed today, and there's nothing says I have to come out here again before the January term, and there's nothing says a man can't be slow. That's something, Ronan said. It's not much. It's what you've got, Ronan said. And a man who gives you what he's actually got is worth 10 who promise what they haven't. Mrs. Boone, I'd give him some coffee. She gave him coffee. He drank it standing by his horse, fast, the way a man drinks when he's decided not to think too hard about what he's doing. At the last, with 1 foot in the stirrup, he said, Mrs. Boone, that mark on the payment vouchers. Yes. You'd want a copy of those vouchers. Would I get one? A citizen can request a copy of a public record on payment of the fee, Wesley Ott said. The fee is 15 cents a page. It's the law, and it's been the law since '71, and nobody's ever asked me for it, not one time in 3 months. He got up. It'd take 3 or 4 weeks, longer if I'm slow. Be slow, said Ronan. I'm awful slow, said Wesley Ott, and rode out. They didn't speak for a while after he was gone. Hattie stood in the yard with the folded paper in her fist and her jaw working. He forged my mark, she said. He forged a mark and had the sheriff witness it, and he's been drawing $4 a month against your land since July. And if you'd signed that page today, you'd have made it all true retroactive. Ronan cranked himself around to face the west. That's not a scheme, Mrs. Boone. That's a habit. A man doesn't do it that smooth the first time. Then he's done it before. He's done it to somebody. Probably several somebodies. Probably widows and men with no kin, because those are the ones nobody comes asking after. He looked up at her. And every one of them is a person who'd stand up and say so if anybody ever gave them a reason to think it'd matter. Nobody in Dry Creek is going to stand up. Not today. Not ever, Mr. Blackridge. You weren't there. 300 people and not one of them would help me lift you into a wagon. I was there, Ronan said. I was on the ground looking up at them, which is a better seat than you had. And I'll tell you what I saw. I saw a woman with 2 children behind the trough who was crying. I saw Ferris walk into his own store rather than watch. I saw the sheriff hold that hat like it was full of snakes. He turned the crank a half turn, back and forth, back and forth. That's not a town that agrees with him. That's a town that's afraid of him. And those look identical right up until the day they don't. Hattie unfolded the paper and looked at Schedule A again. The description of the north draw, down to the rod, in a lawyer's tidy hand. He measured it, she said. What? He measured my draw.
Somebody stood in my draw with a chain and measured it, because you don't write a description that fine off a plat book. The wind moved through the yard. When did you last walk it? Ronan said. Not since June. There's no reason to. The stock waters itself. Walk it tomorrow. She walked it the next morning, an hour after first light, and she was gone 2 hours, and Ronan sat on the sled in the shed door the whole time, with a piece of iron going cold on the anvil in front of him, and did not touch it once. When she came back, she came fast, and she had something in her hand, and she didn't stop until she was standing right in front of him. She held it out. It was a survey stake. Fresh cut, the wood still bright at the point, a strip of red flagging on it, and a brand burned into the flat. The linked D and C of the Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association. There's 9 of them, Hattie said, from the spring head down to where the draw turns. 9 stakes, set in a line, and there's a place where somebody's built a fire and left the ashes, and the ashes are wet all the way through, which means they've been there through the last rain, and the last rain was the 14th of August. Ronan turned the stake over in his hand. That's a company chain crew, he said. 2 men and a rodman, 3 days' work, on your grass, in the dark of the year. He ran his thumb across the brand. He's not waiting to buy it. He's already laid it out. Laid what out? A ditch line. Ronan set the stake down flat on the anvil, and his voice had gone quiet and even, and Hattie found she liked it better when he shouted. 9 stakes falling with the ground from a spring head to a turn. That's not a boundary, Mrs. Boone. Nobody surveys a boundary down a draw. That's a grade line for a ditch, and a ditch means he's got somewhere he means to put your water, and he's already spent money surveying it, which means the somewhere is already sold. Hattie put both hands on the edge of the anvil. Sold to who? I don't know. Then find out. I can't ride. Then find out sitting down, Hattie said, and she heard her own voice come up hard, and she let it. You told me the night you got here that you were the only man alive who knew what was in that survey book. Well, I've got 9 stakes in my draw and a forged mark on a county voucher and a paper in my kitchen that would have handed him the whole section if I'd been fool enough to sign it, and I am done waiting to see what he does next. What's in the book, Mr. Blackridge? Elevations, flows, deeds. Where is it? Ronan was quiet. You said that was a better question than I knew. It's September. Answer it. It was in my satchel, Ronan said. It went into the rocks with me on the Ute Fork, and I had it on the drag out, and I had it in the wagon bed, and then I woke up in a boarding house 11 days later, and I've never seen it since. Then it's gone. Then it's in a wagon, said Ronan Blackridge, belonging to a freighter named Teal, who hauls the Sublette Road, and who has no more idea what he's carrying than that mule does. Hattie stood very still. Does Vane know that? Vane knows I came off that mountain in Teal's wagon, Ronan said. He's known it since October, and he's left it alone 11 months, which means either he's already searched that wagon and come up empty, or he's been waiting for a reason to search it that doesn't look like searching it, Ronan said. And I gave him 9 stakes worth of reason the day I rolled out that door and started fixing your barn. Hattie picked the stake up off the anvil and turned it in her hands, and the low sun caught the red flagging, and out in the draw, a mile north, her cattle were standing in water that had never once quit. Then we start writing it down, she said. All of it. The date on those stakes, the ashes, the voucher numbers off Ott's paper, every word Vane said to me since May, and the day he said it, and who else heard him. Paper doesn't stop a man like that. No, said Hattie Boone, but it makes him have to lie in front of people. And in my experience, a man who's used to being laughed with doesn't do half so well when he's the one has to explain himself. She went in the house and came back out with the ledger Elias had kept the cattle in, and she turned to the first blank page, and she sat down on the shed step next to the sled with the book on her knees. Start at the beginning, she said. October, the Ute Fork. Say it slow, I write plain, but I don't write fast. It took 4 nights to get October down on paper. He talked, and she wrote, and neither of them was good at it. He'd start in the middle and go backward. She'd stop him and ask what day, and he'd say he didn't know what day, it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and she'd write Tuesday or Wednesday, and he'd say that was worthless, and she'd say, worthless is what we have. But it came out. The crew had been 6. The company man over them was named Pell, and Pell carried the book at night, and Ronan carried it by day because Ronan was the one walking the country. They'd been 3 weeks above the Ute Fork, and they were nearly done.
And on the last morning, Pell had told them to cut a new line across the face below the shale. Not the line Ronan had staked the day before, a new one, 40 feet lower, under a slope that Ronan had already written in the book as unstable, do not work below. I told him, Ronan said. I said that face is loose, we'll walk the bench instead, it's a half day longer. He said the company doesn't pay for half days. And you went. I went. He was looking at the stove. Tobin was 22 and he went because I went. That's the piece of it I keep in my pocket. Hattie's pen stopped. Write it down, Ronan said. I'd rather not. Write it down. If we're going to put a man's name in a book, we're going to put mine next to it. She wrote it down. Winter came in mean and left early, and by the middle of March the ground was already opening in cracks you could put a finger in, and by May the country had gone a color Hattie had never seen it go. Not brown. Brown is a color grass turns. This was a kind of gray, and the wind carried it off in sheets, and the sky in the afternoons had a hard yellow shine to it, like the inside of a lamp. The Slaughter Creek went dry the first week of June. It had never gone dry before the 4th in anybody's memory. Hattie's spring did not quit. It slowed. It dropped from the width of a hand to the width of 2 fingers, and the stock pond in the north draw went down 11 feet, and the mud ring around it got wide enough to bog a calf. And she lost a calf in it and pulled it out dead with a rope, and the mules, and sat down in the mud afterward and cried where nobody could see her. But it did not quit. That was the summer people started coming at night. The first was a woman named Ada Kittredge, who had a quarter section east of the Boone place, and 3 children and a husband who'd gone to Cheyenne in April to find work, and hadn't written. She came at 9 o'clock at night with 2 barrels in a cart and stood in the yard and couldn't get the words out. Hattie came off the porch. Mrs. Kittredge, I'll pay you. You'll not. I've got $1.40. Ada. Hattie took the mule's head stall. Pull around to the north side. There's a line there and a valve on it, and you turn it left. Fill both barrels and take a third one next time, because 2 won't last you the week with 3 children. Ada Kittredge stood in the dark and said, I was at Founder's Day. I know you were. I didn't laugh. I know that too, Hattie said. You were behind the trough with your girls. Fill the barrels. The next week it was Odell Ferris, and that one was harder. He came at midnight, which told her everything, and he sat on his wagon seat and wouldn't get down. My well's pumping sand, he said. So's everybody's. I've got a wife. You've got a wife, Hattie agreed, and 4 children, and a note held by the association, and a mark you made in July that said I bought a raffle ticket I never bought. Ferris put his face in his hands. I'll fill your barrels, Hattie said. You'll not pay me and you'll not thank me, but you'll come inside for 10 minutes first, and you'll tell Mr. Blackridge exactly what Cyrus Vane said to you the morning of Founder's Day, and I'll write it down, and you'll put your name on it, your real name, Odell, in your own hand. And if I don't? Then you fill your barrels anyway and go home, Hattie said, because I'm not Vane, and I don't trade in water. He sat there a long time. Then he got down. He talked for 40 minutes. He said Vane had come into the store on the 2nd of July and told him there'd be a raffle, and that number 41 was to be Mrs. Boone's, and that if Ferris was asked, he'd say he sold it. He said Vane had put his hand flat on the counter next to the ledger where the store's note was written and hadn't said one word about the note, hadn't needed to. He said he'd gone home that night and been sick in the yard. Hattie wrote it all. Ronan sat across his table with his hands folded on the wood and said almost nothing, and at the end he said one thing. Odell. Who else did he do that to? What do you mean? He didn't invent that on the 2nd of July. Who else has he leaned on with a note? Ferris looked at the table. There was old man Sowerby, he said, 2 years back. He had that piece on the West Fork with the seep on it. Association took it for a debt, and Sowerby went to his daughters in Kansas and died there that winter. And there was the Nunnally place. And he stopped. And Mrs. Pruitt's husband before he passed. But that's 12 years, and I don't know the details of it. Ronan looked at Hattie. Write the names, he said. I am. By the end of July, there were 19 names in the ledger and 6 statements signed, and there were 14 households pulling water off the Boone line at night, and not one of them said a word about it in town, and Hattie understood that perfectly, and did not hold it against them, and also could not entirely forgive it. Both things were true at the same time, and she'd stopped trying to make them agree. And then Teal came back. He came up the road on the 9th of August with a freight wagon and 4 mules and one arm in a sling, and he stopped in the yard and looked at the big man on the wheeled sled by the shed and said, "Well, hell, they told me you were dead twice. You're Teal. I'm Teal. You hauled me off the Fork Road. I hauled you off the Fork Road and you bled all over 300 pounds of my flour," Teal said. "And I've been carrying your damn satchel for 10 months, and every time I come through this county, something happens and I don't get to it." Hattie came out of the house so fast she nearly went off the step. "What happened to your arm?" Teal looked at her. Then he looked at Ronan. Then he looked back down the road the way he'd come, which was the thing that told them. "Sublette," he said. 3 weeks back. 2 men went through my wagon in the yard behind the freight barn at 2 in the morning. I come out with a lantern, and one of them put a wagon spoke across my arm and broke it in 2 places, and they took a strongbox with $11 in it and left $40 of harness sitting right there in plain sight. He spat. "Now you tell me what kind of thief does that?" "The kind that's looking for something particular," Ronan said. "Did they get it?" "Get what?" "My satchel." "No," Teal said. "On account of I'm a sentimental idiot, and I took it in the house 8 months ago and set it on the shelf over my sister's stove because I kept meaning to write somebody about it, and I never did." Nobody moved for a second. "You've got it," Ronan said. "I've got it." "Where?" Teal reached under the wagon seat and pulled out a canvas satchel gone black with old blood along one side, and he leaned down and put it into the hands of the man on the sled, and Ronan Blackridge held it in his lap and didn't open it. "Open it," Hattie said. "In a minute." "Mr. Blackridge." "In a minute," he said, and his voice cracked, and she left him alone. She took Teal in and fed him. He ate like a freighter. He told her the men in Sublette had been strangers to him, town men, not drovers, and that one of them had a good horse and a bad hat, and he told her the road agent at the freight barn had been paid to be asleep and had spent money the following week. "You'll say all this again?" Hattie asked. "To a lawyer in a room with your hand up?" Teal wiped his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, "I have hauled freight through this county for 9 years, and I have watched the Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association take 4 places off 4 families that I personally loaded wagons for. I'd say it in the street. The book was in the satchel. It was water swollen, and the last 30 pages were fused solid with dried blood and would never come apart. But the elevations were there, and the flows, and the deed notations in Ronan's square hand. And on the 11th page from the back, there was a line he'd copied out of Pell's instructions because he'd thought at the time it was strange. Terminus. Sicker 14, T3N. Deliver not less than 90 minors inches at the section line, per agreement of 4 March. Hattie read it 3 times. "What's section 14? "Nothing," Ronan said. "It's flat scrub 11 miles southwest of here. There's no ranch on it. There's no house on it. There's nothing on it but prairie dogs." Then why would he agree to deliver water there in March of that year? Ronan sat with the book open on his knees, and Hattie watched him get to it, and watched his whole face change. "Because it's not going to be nothing," he said. "Say it plain. 90 minors inches, Mrs. Boone. That's not stock water. That's not a hay meadow. That's a tank." He put his thumb on the page. "That's a locomotive tank. Somebody sold a railroad a water stop on Section 14 in March of that year, and they sold it before they had 1 drop of water to put in it, and the only water inside 11 miles that doesn't quit in a drought is standing in your north draw." The kitchen was very quiet. Out the window, the wind moved the gray grass. "He's got a contract," Hattie said. "He's got a contract with a date on it that's older than his claim on your ground. And that's not clever. That's stupid. And men like Vane get stupid when they think nobody's ever going to look." Ronan closed the book. "He needs your water by a date certain, or he owes a railroad money he hasn't got. That's why the stakes are already set. That's why he's been at you since May. That's why he tried to put a lien on your section for $4 a month. How long has he got?" "I don't know." "Guess." "A contract like that runs 2-3 years to delivery. March of the year I was surveying." Ronan did the arithmetic out loud. "He's in his last summer." Hattie stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her arms crossed and looked out at her burned-up country. And Ronan let her have the quiet for a while. "He'll come himself now," she said. "He will." He came on the 19th of August with the sheriff and 2 men from the association, and he came in the middle of the day, and Hattie was ready for him because she'd been ready for him for 11 months. He got down off his horse and looked around the yard, and she watched him see it. the wire line to the well, the second line running out to the trough, the forge with the new stack, the barn corner sitting square, the sled with the crank, and the man on it. Vane's face did something interesting for about a second and a half. Then it went back to being Vane's face. "Mrs. Boone, you're looking well." "I'm looking the same, Mayor. I'll come to it. This drought's breaking this country in half. 3 places gone under this month alone. And you've got 30 head on ground that's blowing away." He pulled off a glove. "The association will pay you $300 for the section and forgive the county's advance, and I'll throw in the freight to wherever you want to go. That's a kindness, and we both know it." "It was 400 in March a year ago." "That was before the drought." "The drought hasn't touched my water," Hattie said. "And you know it hasn't, because you've had a chain crew in my draw and 9 stakes in my ground, and you didn't ask leave for either one." Sheriff Mallory looked at his saddle horn. Vane didn't blink. "Surveying's not trespass." "It's trespass in this state, and it has been since '73, Ronan said from the sled. $50 a stake or the value of the damage at the owner's election. Mrs. Boone's got 9 of them in a box in her kitchen with your brand on them." "Nobody asked you, cripple." And there it was, out of him fast, before he could stop it, and Hattie saw 2 of his own men look away. "Mayor," she said, "you've made me an offer and I've heard it. Now hear mine. I'll sell you water." Everybody in the yard turned. "I'll sell you water," Hattie said again, "measured at my south line, at a price, on a written agreement, for a term of years, filed at the county seat, where anybody can read it. You'll not own 1 foot of my ground, and you'll not set another stake on it, and you'll pay quarterly and in advance, and the first time you're late, the water stops." Vane stared at her. Then he laughed, and it was a real laugh, and that was worse than the other kind. "You'd sell me water." "That's right." "Mrs. Boone." He put his glove back on, finger by finger. "You have not got the money to hold that ground through September, let alone deliver water anywhere. You've got no ditch, no headgate, no pump, no pipe, and no man on the place who can stand up long enough to dig a post hole." He swung up into the saddle. $300. "The offer's good till the 1st of October, and then it's $250, and after that it's whatever the sheriff's sale brings." "Then I'll see you at the 1st of October." "You'll see me before that," said Cyrus Vane, "when you're hungry," and rode out. That night, Hattie sat at the kitchen table with every dollar she had in the world in front of her. It came to $211.60, and it had taken her 2 years to put together, and it was the only thing standing between her and a poorhouse in a bad month. "Say it," she said. "Say what?" "Say what it costs. All of it. The pipe, the pump, the headgate, the filing fee, the lawyer, the lot." Ronan had the numbers on a board. He'd been working them for 4 days. 240, he said. "I've got 211. "Then it's 211, and we do the headgate in wood, and hope." Hattie sat and looked at the money. "If this goes wrong," she said, "I've got nothing. Not a dollar. Not for feed, not for taxes, not for a doctor. I'd be a woman on a section of grass with a spring and no way to hold either one." "That's right." "You could tell me it'll work." "I could," Ronan said. "It'd be a lie. I've built about 9 things in your yard this year, and 4 of them failed the first time, and 1 of them hit you in the head." Hattie almost smiled. "But here's what I know," he said. "Right now you own water that a railroad has already paid for and can't get. That's not a small thing, Mrs. Boone. That is a very large thing, and the only reason it's not making you rich is that nobody can measure it, and nobody's got it on paper. A pipe, and a weir box, and a filing turn a thing everybody argues about into a number in a book. And Vane cannot fight a number in a book. He spent 30 years fighting people's feelings." She put her hands flat on either side of the money. "Elias would have sold," she said quietly. "He'd have taken the 300 and gone to Sublette and got work at the mill, and we'd have been all right, and I'd have hated him for 11 years and never once said so. He's not here." "No." "And you're not him." Hattie pushed the money across the table. "Spend it," she said. It took them 31 days, and it was, from the outside, the funniest thing that had happened in Sabine County in a decade. Word got around the second week, the way it does. A drummer saw the pipe come in on the freight and told the mercantile. And the mercantile told everybody. The fat widow was digging a ditch. The fat widow had spent every cent she had on iron pipe in the worst drought in 20 years. The fat widow and her cripple were building a waterworks in a country where the grass was gone. Men rode out to look. They didn't stop. They sat on their horses on the ridge and looked and rode back to town and reported. There was a night in the first week of September when Hattie came in at 10 o'clock covered to the elbows in mud with her hand split open in 4 places and found she couldn't hold the coffee cup, and she set it down and stood at the counter and said, "They're laughing." They are. Belle Pruitt's boy rode out today and sat up there on the rise for an hour with 2 others, and one of them was pointing. Let him point. That's easy to say from a sled. She heard it come out of her mouth, and she'd have given a year of her life to have it back. The silence in that kitchen went on for about 6 seconds. "That's fair," Ronan said. "It's not fair. It's the meanest thing I've ever said to a living soul."
"It's fair," he said, "and it's true. And you've been swinging a pick for 9 days while I've been sitting in a shed making marks on a board, and if you didn't say it sometime, you'd be something other than human." He turned the sled toward her. "I'll say the rest of it so you don't have to. You're doing all of it, every pound of it. And when it's done, they'll say the cripple built a waterworks, and nobody will say the woman dug it. And I know that, and I can't fix it." Hattie put both hands over her face. "I'm so tired," she said. "I know. I'm 41 years old and my knees are gone and I've got a hole in my hand that won't close. And I dug 200 feet of ditch today, and it's not half. I know. And I don't know why I'm doing it. Yes, you do." She took her hands down. "You're doing it," Ronan said, "because a man stood on a wagon in front of 300 people and told them what you were worth, and you have been arguing with him ever since, and you are not going to stop until the argument is settled. And that's not a noble reason. That's spite. I've got the same engine, and I've never had a better one." Hattie laughed, a wet, wrecked, sideways laugh. "Spite." Spite and stubbornness, and about 11 years of being told to sit down. He rolled to the stove and got the pot with a rag, because he could reach the stove now. They'd cut the legs down in July. "Sit. I'll pour it. It's the one thing on this place I can do." She sat, and he poured, and he spilled about a third of it, and neither one of them said anything about that either. They finished the ditch on the 28th of September. It ran 1,100 feet from the spring head down the draw to a wooden head gate at the south line, with a weir box Ronan had built out of 2-inch plank and a graduated stick set in it, and 140 feet of iron pipe through the low place where the ground wouldn't hold a bank. There were 2 pumps, a hand pump at the house, and a second one, a lift pump on a rocker arm, that Ronan had built to be worked sitting down, with a counterweight of a sack of scrap iron, so a man with no legs could run it with his shoulders alone. He'd built the counterweight rig for himself. It wound up mattering for something else entirely. They opened the gate on the 29th at 4 in the afternoon, and the water came down 1,100 feet of new ditch and went over the weir, and Ronan read the stick and said a number, and Hattie wrote it in the ledger. "Say it again." 94 miners inches, said Ronan Blackridge, at the south line on the 29th day of September, in the 3rd year of a drought. Hattie sat down on the bank of her own ditch with her feet in her own water. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Wesley Ott came up the road at a hard trot with his horse lathered and his hat gone. "Mrs. Boone," she got up. "Fire," Ott said. "Fire on the Ute Fork Road. It jumped the Slaughter Creek bed at noon, and there's nothing in that creek to stop it, and the wind's out of the northwest, and it has been out of the northwest since 10 o'clock this morning." Hattie turned her head northwest. The sky in that direction was the wrong color and had been for an hour, and she'd looked at it twice and told herself it was dust. "How far?" 9 miles. It was 9 miles an hour ago." "Who's out there?" "The Kittredge place is in it, the Nunnally section, what's left of it. There's 4 families on the flat between here and the fork, and none of them have got water, and the town's got 200 feet of hose and a pumper that hasn't run since the spring." Ronan was already moving. He had the crank going and he was headed for the shed, and he was shouting before he got there. "Ott, how many men in town?" 50, 60. "Are they coming?" "They're arguing about whether to wet the town or go out." "They'll wet the town." Ronan slammed the shed door open with his fist. "Mrs. Boone, hitch both mules to the freight wagon, not the buckboard, the freight wagon. Ott, you can ride?" "Yes, sir." "Then you ride back and you tell them one thing and you say it exactly. You tell them there's 94 inches of water standing at the Boone South line and a filled cistern and a pump that runs off a rocker arm, and every barrel in this county ought to be pointed at it right now, and if they'd rather stand in Main Street arguing they can watch 4 families burn from there." Ott went white.
They won't listen to me. I'm 3 months in the job. Then lie, said Ronan. Tell them the county says so. You're the county. Ott spun the horse and went. What happened over the next 9 hours was not clean, and it was not orderly, and afterward nobody could agree on the sequence of it. Hattie hitched the mules. It took her 11 minutes because the near mule wouldn't take the collar with the smoke smell coming, and she fought that mule and lost and fought it again and won by putting her coat over its eyes. She backed the freight wagon to the shed, and she and Ronan loaded it. Every barrel on the place, 7 of them, the 200 feet of hose he'd made in July out of pieced canvas and pitch that had never once been used, the rocker pump, 4 wet blankets, a crosscut, and both axes. Then she looked at him, and he looked at her, and they both knew. I can get in the wagon. It's 4 foot to the bed, and there's no boardwalk, and I have to be somewhere else in 10 minutes. Mrs. Boone. He'd already cranked himself around behind it. Do you remember what I said the first night about the barrow? You said you'd build me something better. I built 4 somethings better, and one of them is a plank ramp with a chain winch that I made in June because I got tired of you lifting me, Ronan said. It's leaning on the north side of the shed under the tarp. I never told you about it because it takes 9 minutes, and I was ashamed of how long it takes. It took 7. She got him in the wagon bed and lashed the sled and lashed him, and she got the plow up beside him because he made her arguing about it the whole time. We've got no time for a plow. We've got no time to not have a plow. Get it in. They went northwest at a run. The first place they came to was the Kittredge quarter, and it was already gone. The house was standing, but the grass was burning in a line 400 yards wide, coming down the slope, and the barn was going, and Ada Kittredge was in the yard with a wet sack beating at the sod roof of her own house, alone, with her 3 children standing by the well crying. Hattie put the wagon in the yard. Ada! The house, the roof. Leave the house. It's my house. Ada Kittredge, look at me. Hattie had her by both arms. Your roof is sod, and sod doesn't burn, and your grass does. That fire will go around this house and take everything you own that's alive. Where are your cattle? In the west pen. The gate's warped. I couldn't get it. Get the children in my wagon. But in the wagon. Hattie went to the west pen at a run and hit the warped gate with her shoulder, and it did not move. And she hit it again, and it did not move. And she stepped back and picked up the loose end of a corral rail and put it through the gate's slats and threw her whole weight on it. All of her. Everything the town of Dry Creek had ever laughed at. And the gate came off its hinges and went down flat, and 22 head came over it. She stood in the dust and the smoke with the rail still in her hands. Ronan, from the wagon. Mrs. Boone! What? The plow. Now, between here and the Nunnally place, there's a swale, and if we cut a break at the swale, we hold 4 sections. I can't plow and haul. You plow. I'll haul. She turned around. He'd got himself out of his lashings, and he was sitting up on the sled at the front of the wagon bed with the lines of the near mule in his hands and his back braced against the seat rail. You can't drive, she said. I've got hands and a braced back and a straight road. If that wagon hits a hole, you go out of it. Then I go out of it, said Ronan Blackridge. Hitch the plow to the off mule and cut me a line from the swale to the rocks, and put your back into it, and I'll have the barrels wet at the far end when you get there. It was the single worst hour of Hattie Boone's life, and she would say so for the rest of it. She walked a plow behind one mule for 1.25 miles through smoke thick enough to hide the mule's ears, and the ground was baked so hard the share came out 4 times, and she reset it 4 times with her bare hands on hot iron. Her lungs went first, and then her eyes, and somewhere in the middle of it, she stopped being able to see the line and started walking it by the feel of the swale under her feet. She cut a furrow 3 feet wide. Then she turned around and cut it again alongside, and then a third, because Ronan had shouted a number at her before she started. 9 feet, he'd said, 9 feet minimum, or it jumps. And she had counted the passes out loud the whole way to keep from stopping. At the far end, the Nunnally place, there were men. 14 of them, then 20. They'd come out from town after all. Ott had lied like a champion. And they'd come with barrels and buckets and no plan whatsoever, and they were standing in a yard arguing about which building to save when a freight wagon came out of the smoke driven by a man sitting on the floor of it. Who's got the pumper? Ronan shouted. It's in town. It won't. Then forget it. You. What's your name? Cobb. Cobb. Get 4 men and take the barrels off this wagon and set them in a line along that furrow, 1 every 100 feet. Don't stack them. Spread them. You, take the hose and run it from the barrel at the top to the low corner, and don't kink it. It's canvas and it'll split. You three, wet blankets, and you walk the furrow. And any time a spark crosses, you put it out with the blanket, and you do not chase it more than 10 feet from the line. Somebody said, "Says who?" Ronan looked up at him out of the wagon bed. "Says a man who's watched 200 acres burn from ground level," he said, "which is more than you've done from a horse. 10 feet. Any more and you'll get in front of it, and it'll take you." They did it. Hattie never could account for why they did it, except that it was the only instruction anybody had given in an hour, and men in a fire will follow a voice that has a number in it. They held the swale. Not all of it. The fire crossed at the north end where the furrow petered out into rock and took 40 acres on the far side and burned Nanali's hay barn, and a man named Pike got his hands burned bad enough that he lost 2 fingers later, and one of Ada Kittredge's cows died in the smoke, and 2 more went blind. It was not a victory that anybody sang about, but it stopped at the furrow. It stopped for 900 yards along a line 3 passes wide that a woman had walked behind a plow, and it burned down to the bare dirt and sat there and went out. And behind it stood the Nunnally place, and the Kittredge place, and the Vaughn place, and the Dolan place, with 11 people in it, and a mile past that the near edge of the town of Dry Creek. At 4 in the morning, the wind quit. Hattie sat down where she was standing in the ash and could not get up. Somebody put water in her hands. She drank it without looking. Somebody else said something about her face, and she put her hand up and found her eyebrows were gone, and the skin over her cheekbone was tight and shiny, and she thought about that for a second and then didn't think about it anymore. Men were coming past her out of the dark, walking their horses, black to the elbows. Cobb stopped in front of her. He was maybe 50, a rangy man with a burned shirt, and he stood there holding his hat and could not seem to work out what to do with his face. "Mrs. Boone." "Mr. Cobb." "That furrow. What about it?" "Who put it in?" Hattie looked up at him from the ground. "I did," she said. Cobb stood there. "You walked a plow 1.25 miles. 1.25 miles and about 40 yards. 3 passes. She coughed for a while. "The mule did most of it." "The mule did not do most of it," said Cobb. He turned around and walked off about 10 steps and stood with his back to her, and then he came back. "I was at Founder's Day," he said. "I know it. I laughed. I know that too. I want to say something about it, and I can't find it." "Then don't," Hattie said. "I'm too tired to hear it tonight, and you'd only say it wrong, and we'd both feel worse. Come out in a month and say it then if you still want to." Cobb nodded slowly. "Where's Blackridge?" "In the wagon." He was in the wagon, and he was asleep sitting up with the line still in his hands, and there was a place on his hip that had opened again from 6 hours of sitting braced on a plank floor and had been bleeding through his trousers for probably 4 of those hours, and he had not felt 1 second of it. Hattie climbed up in the wagon bed and looked at it. Then she sat down beside him in the ash and the blood and put her head back against the sideboard. And about a minute later, without waking up all the way, he put his hand over hers on the boards, and she left it there. And that was the whole of it, and neither of them ever said 1 word about it afterward. At 6 in the morning, the sun came up on 11 miles of black ground, and at 7:30, in the yard of the Nunnally place, with 30 men standing around a wagon, Mayor Cyrus Vane rode in from town, clean, on a fresh horse, and reined up, and looked around at all of it, and said, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "Well, I hope somebody's thought about who's paying for those barrels." Nobody laughed. Not one man in that yard laughed, and Hattie Boone, sitting in the wagon bed with her eyebrows burned off, and a sleeping mountain man's hand over hers, watched Cyrus Vane hear that silence and understand it, and she saw the exact moment it landed on him. He'd made a joke on a wagon once, and 300 people had roared. He made one now, in a burned yard, at sunrise, and got nothing back but the sound of the wind. Vane sat his horse in the middle of that silence for 4 or 5 seconds, which is a long time to sit in a silence when you're used to being answered. "I'll say it plainer," he said. "The county's got no fund for barrels. If a man wants reimbursement, he'll want to come by the office with a bill of sale, not a story." "They were her barrels," Cobb said. "Beg pardon?" "The barrels." Cobb didn't raise his voice. He was still holding his hat. 7 of them, off the Boone place, come out of her yard on her wagon behind her mules. So there's your bill, Mayor, and you can settle it with her." Vane looked at Cobb the way a man looks at a dog that's growled for the first time in 9 years. "Amos Cobb," he said, "how's that note of yours?" And that was the moment, though nobody in the yard would have put it that way at the time. 12 hours earlier, that sentence would have shut Cobb's mouth and everybody else's with it. Now it hung in the smoke and just sat there, ugly and naked, in front of 30 men who had spent the night with wet blankets in their hands. Cobb said, "It's due in March, same as it was." "Then I'd think about March." "I have been," Cobb said. "All night, matter of fact. I've been thinking about a lot of things." Vane turned his horse. He was too smart to keep going. He got about 10 feet and then he made his one real mistake of that morning, which was that he couldn't help himself. And he looked back at the wagon bed where Hattie Boone was sitting in the ash with her eyebrows burned off. "Mrs. Boone, that water of yours. What about it?" "You'll have noticed it kept 4 families in business last night." "I noticed." "A thing like that gets to be a public matter." He settled his hat. "A resource this county depends on can't be sitting under one private party. That's the kind of thing a board of commissioners takes an interest in." "Then let them take one," Hattie said. "I filed a claim on the 29th. It's in the book at the county seat with a date and a number and a measured flow at the south line, which is more than any man in this county can say about any water he's got." Vane smiled. "Is it?" he said, and rode off. And Hattie sat there in the wagon bed feeling something cold go through her that had nothing to do with the morning. Ronan had woken up somewhere in the middle of it. She didn't know when. She only realized because his hand had gone tight over hers. "He's got a filing," Ronan said. "He can't. Ott would have told us." "He's got a filing, or he's about to have one." Ronan let go of her hand and pushed himself upright with a grunt. That smile wasn't bluff. That smile was a man holding a card. They got home at 9 in the morning, and neither of them was fit to be walking around. Hattie's face was blistered along the left cheekbone, and both hands had split across the palm, and one of the splits was down into the meat. Ronan's hip had bled through the plank floor of the wagon bed and dried there, and when she cut the trouser leg away from it, she had to sit down on the floor for a minute with her back against the bed frame before she could look at it a second time. "How bad?" "Don't ask me that." "Mrs. Boone." "It's bad," she said. "It's bad, and it's got a color to it I don't like, and I'm going to clean it and pack it, and you're not going to say one word about how much it costs or how tired I am, and if you say the word barn, I will put you in the barn." "I wasn't going to say barn." "You were." "I was," Ronan admitted. "He ran a fever that night and a worse one the next, and on the 3rd day Hattie hitched the mules at 4 in the morning and drove into Dry Creek for the first time since Founder's Day, more than a year, and walked into Dr. Amos Shrike's front room with her burned face and her wrapped hands and said, "I need you to come out to my place." Shrike was 61 and half deaf and had a reputation for saying exactly what he thought, which in Dry Creek made him either a hero or a nuisance depending on the week. "For you or for him?" "For him." "Pressure sore?" "Yes." "How long?" 2 months on and off. It closed in August. It opened again the night of the fire. Shrike put his coffee down. "Mrs. Boone, I've been in this town 19 years and no one has ever once come and asked me to go look at that man." "I'm asking." "I know you are. I'm remarking on it." He got up and started putting things in a bag. $2 for the ride and I'll not charge for the visit. And don't argue, I've got no patience this morning and you've got no eyebrows. He came out and he stayed 4 hours and he was blunt about all of it. The sore was down past the fat and into the tissue over the bone and it needed cleaning twice a day, not once. Ronan needed to be off that hip 4 hours out of every 6. He needed a different bed. Not a straw tick. A tick was killing him. He needed something that gave under the bone. And he needed to be turned by 2 people, not 1, because one person doing it 8 times a day would be dead inside a year, and then he'd be dead a month after. "There's no second person," Ronan said. "Then get one." "With what?" "That," said Shrike, "is not a medical question." He snapped the bag shut. "Mrs. Boone, walk me out." In the yard, he stood by his buggy and looked at the wire lines and the forge and the rocker pump and the 1,100 feet of ditch running down the draw. "He built all this?" "He drew it. I built it." Shrike climbed up. "2 things. First, you are 41 years old and carrying more weight than your knees will take. And I'm telling you as a doctor and not as a citizen of this town that if you keep going the way you've been going since the fire, Your knees will finish before you do, and then there'll be two of you on that floor. Sit down when you can. Don't be proud about it. That's a strange thing to hear from anybody in Dry Creek. Dry Creek's an idiot, Shrike said. Second thing, there's a woman in town needs work and won't ask for it. Belle Pruitt. She's been letting rooms to nobody for 8 months since the association bought her mortgage, and her boy's gone off to sublet, and she's ashamed to be seen at the Mercantile. She nursed Blackridge 7 months for free out of her own pocket, and she'd do it again and she'd be glad of a place. Hattie stood in the yard. I can't pay a wage. Pay her a room and a plate and whatever's left over in a good month, Shrike said, and you'll be paying her more than this town has paid her in a year. Belle Pruitt came on the 6th of October with 1 trunk and a cat, and she did not say much for the first 3 days, and on the 4th day she stood in the kitchen and said, I want to say a thing and then never say it again. All right. I stopped feeding him because my son told me I was making a fool of myself. I know. He was in my house and I let him go hungry in my house. Mrs. Pruitt, I'm going to say the whole thing. Her hands were shaking on the dish towel. And then I'll work, and I'll work hard. And I don't want it brought up again by you or him or anybody because I have carried it every night since April, and it has made me a smaller person than I was. Hattie looked at her for a while. Then it's said, she said, the bread's not going to make itself, and I've got hands that won't close, and the sore wants doing at 11. That was the whole ceremony, and it was enough for both of them. The notice came on the 11th of October, and it came nailed to the door of the Mercantile, and Wesley Ott brought a copy of it out to the ranch himself because he wanted to hand it over instead of having somebody read about it. It was headed Notice of Sheriff's Sale, and it recited a promissory note in the amount of $680, principal and accrued interest, executed by Elias T. Boone on the 4th of February, and assigned to the Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association, and secured by the property described therein, being the whole of Hattie Boone's section. Hattie read it standing in the kitchen. Then she set it on the table very carefully, as if it might go off. Elias died in April, she said. Yes, ma'am. The 4th of February that year he was in bed. He'd been in bed since the middle of January. He could not hold a spoon, Mr. Ott. He could not hold a spoon, and they say he signed a note for $680. There's a witness on it, Ott said. Who? Sheriff Mallory. Ronan laughed out loud, one hard note. He's got one signature in his pocket, he said, and he uses it for everything. That's not a conspiracy, that's a rut. It's still a note, Ott said. It's still recorded, and the sale's set for the 22nd of November, and unless somebody stops it, that section goes on the courthouse steps, and the association will bid $680 against a piece worth $1,100, and there won't be another bidder because there is not another man in Sabine County with $680 who'd bid against Cyrus Vane. Hattie sat down. And the water? That's the other thing. Kitty took a breath, and Hattie watched a young clerk get to the part he'd been dreading the whole ride out. You filed a claim on the ditch on the 29th of September, number 204 in the book. That's right. On the 2nd of October, Mr. Vane came in and filed a claim of prior appropriation on the same water, diversion from the same spring, same draw, 90 miners inches, delivery at section 14. Ott's ears had gone red again. With the date of first appropriation of the 14th of March, 3 years back. The kitchen went so quiet Hattie could hear the fire. That's a year and a half before he ever set a stake in my draw. Yes, ma'am. It's a lie. Yes, ma'am, I expect it is. Ott looked at his hands. But under the law of this state, the first man to appropriate water and put it to beneficial use holds the right, and it doesn't matter one bit whose land it crosses. If his date stands, your ditch is junior to his. He can take 90 inches out of your draw before you get a drop, and he'll have the right of way to build across your section to do it, and there's not a thing a sheriff or a judge can do about it, because that's not stealing. That's the water law. Ronan had gone very still. Say the number again, he said. Sir? The filing number. Hers was 204. What's his? Ott flipped the page. 191, he said. And when did he file it? 2nd of October. But her number's higher than his. Well, yes. The entries in that book are numbered when they're... Ott stopped. He stopped dead, standing in the middle of Hattie Boone's kitchen, and Hattie watched the color come up his neck and into his face. They're numbered in sequence, Ott said slowly, in order of receipt, Every one of them. There's a number and a date, and they run straight through the book from the front. That's how it's done. That's how it's been done since 71. So how does a filing made on the 2nd of October have a number 13 lower than one made on the 29th of September? It doesn't, said Wesley Ott. It can't. Unless somebody wrote it into a blank line. Nobody said anything for a moment. Are there blank lines in that book? Hattie asked. Ott swallowed. There's a page where 2 entries were struck out in June, 2 years back. Filings that were withdrawn. The lines were ruled through and left. I've seen them 100 times and never thought about them once. And who keeps that book? It's kept in the recorder's office at the county seat, Ott said. In a cabinet, and the recorder is Mr. Pell. Ronan Blackridge said one word, and it was not a word Hattie had heard him use in front of her before, and she didn't correct him. Pell, she said. Harlan Pell. Your company man. My company man from the Ute Fork Survey, Ronan said, who told 6 men to cut a line under a loose face, and who now apparently keeps the book that says who owns the water in this county. Ott looked from one of them to the other. He came in from the association last spring, he said. The commissioners appointed him. It wasn't even a vote, it was a motion and a second, and it was done inside a minute, and I remember thinking it was odd that a rangeland man would want a desk. Hattie stood up and went to the window and put both palms on the sill, which hurt, and she left them there anyway. So we've got a note my dead husband couldn't have signed, witnessed by a sheriff. We've got a mark I never made on a voucher, witnessed by the same sheriff. We've got 9 stakes in my draw and a chain crew that never asked leave. And now we've got a water right written backward into a blank line in a county book by a man who watched a boy die under a rock. She turned around. Mr. Ott, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer, because I'm about to ask more of you than any woman has a right to ask of a man who sends $9 a month to his mother in sublet. Ott said, ask it. Can you get me a certified copy of that page? Any citizen can request a certified copy of a public record. That's not what I asked. I asked, can you get it? Ott stood there with his hat in his hands, and Hattie watched him do the sum. And it was not a fast sum, and she respected him for that. It's 15 cents a page, he finally said, and a certified copy is signed and sealed by the recorder himself. By Pell. By Pell. A muscle moved in Ottie's jaw. But there's a thing about a certified copy that Mr. Pell may not have thought about, being new to a desk. When a citizen requests one, the request goes in the fee book. Date, name, what was asked for, what was paid. And the fee book is a public record too. So the day I hand you a certified copy of that page, there is a permanent entry in the county's own books that says Mrs. Hattie Boone asked to see it, and that Harlan Pell put his seal on what he gave her. And if he alters it after, then he's altered a record that a citizen already holds a sealed copy of, Ott said, and that's not a land dispute anymore, ma'am. That's a felony, and it's not tried in this county. It's tried by the state. Ronan was watching him with something close to admiration. Son, he said, how old are you? 23. You've got the makings. I've got a mother in Sublet, said Wesley Ott, and I have been sick to my stomach for 4 months, and I'd rather be sick over something than sick over nothing. 15 cents, Mrs. Boone. I'll want it in coin because I'm going to put it in the drawer in front of him. He rode out with the coin in his glove. He was back in 6 days with 2 sealed pages, and he had a black eye. He would not say where he got it. He said he'd fallen off a horse, and Hattie let him have that, and she saw Ronan look at the eye and then look away, and she knew what Ronan was doing, which was filing it. They sat at the kitchen table with a lamp and looked at the page. You could see it. That was the thing that made Hattie's hands shake. You did not need to be a lawyer or a clerk or a man of any education whatsoever. Entry 191 sat in a line that had been ruled through with a single stroke, and the words withdrawn 6 June still showed underneath, faint, where somebody had tried to scrape them and given up. The hand was different from the hands above and below it. The ink was blacker, and it was crowded. The writing got smaller at the end of the line, the way writing does when a man is trying to fit something into a space that was not built for it. He was in a hurry, Ronan said. He was in a hurry, Hattie agreed. That's what they never can help. He tapped the page. They plan for years, and then at the end they've got 4 days and a blank line, and they cram. Hattie sat back. It's not enough, she said. It's a good deal. It's not enough, Mr. Blackridge, and you know it isn't. It proves a page was written on out of order. It doesn't prove Vane knew. He'll put the whole of it on Pell in about 4 seconds, and Pell will take it, because Pell has been taking things for that man for 3 years. She rubbed her eyes. We've got to have the thing that puts it in Vane's own hand. We have got the thing that puts it in Vane's own hand. Where? Ronan pulled the survey book across the table and opened it to the 11th page from the back and turned it around. Terminus. Secrum 14, T3N. Deliver not less than 90 minors inches at the section line, per agreement of 4 to March. There's a contract, he said. There is an actual piece of paper executed in March of that year in which somebody promised a railroad 90 inches of water at section 14. It has got a signature on it, and whoever's signature that is, that man knew in March that he did not own 1 drop, because he was still paying me to walk the country and find out where the drops were. How do we get it? We don't. The railroad's got it. Then we don't get it, Ronan said. We make them bring it. The hearing was set for the 15th of November, a week before the sale, on Hattie's petition to enjoin, and it was held in the courthouse at Sabine because there was nowhere in Dry Creek big enough, and because Judge Marius Kell wrote a circuit, and Sabine was where the circuit was that week. She'd spent $31 she did not have on a lawyer named Cottrell out of the county seat, a tired man with a bad cough, who had once run against Vane's brother-in-law for county attorney and lost by 11 votes, and had been drinking about it ever since. He was not a good lawyer. He was, as Ronan put it, a sufficient lawyer with a grudge, which for their purposes was better. On the 11th, 4 days before, Cottrell had a subpoena served on the general offices of the Northern Plains and Sabine Railway at Cheyenne, commanding the production of any agreement for water delivery at Section 14, Township 3 North, executed on or about the 4th of March. On the 12th, Cyrus Vane came out to the Boone place alone. No sheriff, no association men, just Vane on a good horse and a good coat in the middle of the afternoon, and he sat there in the yard and didn't get down. Hattie came out. Belle Pruitt stayed in the doorway with a broom in her hands, which was, Hattie thought later, one of the more touching and less useful gestures of that entire year. Mrs. Boone. Mayor. I'll not waste your time. $900. The note goes in the stove, and the county's advance is forgiven, and you keep the house and the improvements and 40 acres around it as a life estate. You'd be a landowner till the day you die, and you'd never have to work another season. Hattie stood there. That's a real offer, she said. That's the first real offer you've ever made me. It's the best you'll ever hear. It's 3 times what you said in August. August, said Vane, was before I read a subpoena. And there it was, out in the open at last, and Hattie found she was not even angry. She was almost relieved. $900 was the sound of a man who could not afford a hearing. Mayor, can I ask you a thing? Ask. That day at Founder's Day, when you put him in a cart and made a joke of it in front of the whole town. She had her hands folded in front of her, the way she always folded them. Did you know he'd been walking your water for you? Or did somebody hand you a name and you never thought about it again? Vane's face didn't change. That was the answer, in a way. I know what you want, he said. You want me to say something you can carry around. I'll give you something instead. That man on the sled is dead in 5 years. You know it, and the doctor knows it, and he knows it. 5 years, and probably 3, and every one of them is going to cost you more than the last. And when he's gone, you'll be 45 or 46 with no husband, no children, no money, and a section of grass in a county that doesn't like you. He gathered the reins. $900 now is a life. $900 in 5 years is a headstone and a train ticket. I'm not being cruel, Mrs. Boone. I'm being the only person who's told you the truth in a year. Hattie stood in the yard. She thought about a lot of things in the 4 seconds it took her to answer, and one of them was the milk cow bawling in the dark 2 Aprils ago, and one of them was a hand over hers on the boards of a wagon bed at 4 in the morning. I've been told the truth plenty, she said. It's just that most of the people telling it were laughing while they did it, so it didn't take. She stepped back from the horse. The hearing's the 15th. I'll see you there. Mrs. Boone, get off my ground, Cyrus. She had never once called him by his name. He heard it. He got off her ground. The courthouse at Sabine held about 90 people if you packed them and let them stand at the back. On the morning of the 15th, there were 211 in and around that building, and they were still coming in wagons at 9 o'clock, and the ones who couldn't fit stood in the street outside the open windows in a cold wind and waited for somebody in the doorway to pass back what was being said. Hattie had not expected that. She had honestly not expected 20. She sat at the front with Cottrell on one side and Ronan on the other, and the courthouse had a step at the door that nobody had ever thought about, and 4 men had carried him and his sled up it, Cobb and Teal, and a man named Vaughn and Odell Ferris. And they had done it badly and dropped him 3 inches at the top, and Ronan had said, "Gentlemen, I've been dropped by professionals." And there'd been laughter, real laughter, the ordinary kind. And Hattie had had to look at the floor for a second. Judge Marius Kell was 70, thin as a rail, and had a way of listening with his eyes shut that made lawyers nervous. Cottrell put on the note first. He put on Dr. Shrike, who testified that he had attended Elias Boone from the 9th of January, and that by the last week of that month, the man could not close his right hand around a spoon, and that he had said so to 3 people at the time, and that a signature on the 4th of February was not a thing he could imagine. He put on Hattie, who produced Elias's letters from a tin box and passed up 2 written in December and 2 written in January, and any person in that room could see that the January hand was a wreck of the December hand, and neither of them was the tidy, level, confident signature on the note. Then Cottrell called Sheriff Tuck Mallory as the witnessing signature, and Tuck Mallory sat down in that chair and put his hat on his knee and did not answer the second question. "Sheriff, I'll ask you again. Did you observe Elias Boone execute this instrument on the 4th of February? Mallory looked at the back of the room for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to consult with counsel." There was a noise in that courtroom. It came from 200 people at once, and it wasn't a word. Judge Kell opened his eyes. "Sheriff, you understand what you've just done." "I do, Your Honor." "You'll step down and you'll not leave this building." Kell looked at the county attorney, who was Vane's brother-in-law, and who had gone the color of a dish rag. "And you'll not speak to him, sir. Not one syllable. Bailiff, see to that." Cottrell put on the vouchers next, and the forged mark, and Wesley Ott swore that he had drawn the payments out of the fund himself on 3 occasions, and had never once in his life seen Hattie Boone sign anything until the day he watched her write her name in her own kitchen in a fair round hand. Then Cottrell put on the recorder's page. He did it slowly, and he did it in the dullest way possible, which was exactly right. He read the numbers out one at a time, 188, 189, 190, 192, 193, and then he stopped and asked the clerk to read the date on 204, and then the date on 191, and he let the room do the arithmetic itself. You could hear it go through them like water going down a ditch. Harlan Pell was called. Hattie had never laid eyes on him. He was a compact man of about 50 with a careful mustache and the kind of stillness that comes from years of not being looked at closely. And he sat in that chair and said, without much preamble, that the entry had been made on the 2nd of October, that he had made it himself, and that the numbering was a clerical error of his own on account of the office being busy. "Mr. Pell," Cottrell said, "the entry sits on a line that had been ruled through and marked withdrawn." "Space is space, sir. We're short of books." "And whose instruction was it to make the entry?" "Nobody's instruction. A filing came in and I recorded it." "Who brought it in?" "Mr. Vane." "And what did he say?" "He said file it." "Did he say what date to write?" "He did not." "So the date of first appropriation, the 14th of March, 3 years past, that came from where?" "From the affidavit." "And who swore the affidavit?" "Mr. Vane." Cottrell coughed for a while, which he did whenever he wanted a jury or a judge to sit in a fact, and then he said, "No further questions of this witness at this time, Your Honor, but I'd ask he be held subject to recall." And then he called Ronan Blackridge, and 4 men carried the sled to the front of the room and set it beside the witness chair, and Ronan Blackridge was sworn sitting on the floor of a county courthouse with his hand up. He testified for an hour and 10 minutes. He put the survey book in evidence. He read the elevations. He read the deed notations. He read the line about Section 14 in the agreement of the 4th of March, and Cottrell asked him what it meant, and he said what it meant, in plain words, so that a farmer at the back window could follow it. That in March, a year and a half before anybody set a stake in the Boone draw, somebody had promised a railroad 90 inches of water he did not own. Then the association's lawyer got up. His name was Meese, and he'd come from Cheyenne, and he was very good, which was the first honest disadvantage they'd faced all year. "Mr. Blackridge,
You were the cruise field man on the Ute Fork. I was. You were responsible for the placement of the line. I was. On the morning of the slide, the line was cut below an unstable face. It was. A man died. Yes. His name? Tobin. Jesse Tobin.
I was 22. And who walked that crew below that face, Mr. Blackridge? The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a horse shift in the street. Hattie's hands closed on the bench. I did, said Ronan Blackridge. Say that again. I did. He said it flat and loud enough for the men at the windows. Harlan Pell gave the order, and I took it, and I walked 6 men under that shale, and I'd written in my own book 2 days before that it was loose. It's on page 41. You can read it.
I'd be obliged if you did, because I've had 18 months to say this out loud and no place to say it, and there's a woman in Bellefonte with a boy's clothes in a trunk who's never heard one word from me. Mies had made a mistake, and he knew it inside of 2 seconds. Hattie watched him try to get off it. So, by your own admission, you are a man whose judgment, my judgment killed a boy, Ronan said. That's true. Now ask me
whether I wrote the elevations down right, because that's what I'm here about, and I'll tell you I did. And you can send any man in this county up the Ute Fork with a level and check every number in that book, and I will pay for it out of money I have not got. Judge Kell said, Mr. Mies. Your Honor? You may want to sit down. At 11 o'clock, an agent of the Northern Plains and Sabine Railway named Halstead came into the courthouse at Sabine with a leather case and a return ticket for the 440 and produced, under subpoena, one executed agreement dated the 4th of March, 3 years prior. It was 2 pages. It committed the Dry Creek Land and Cattle Association to deliver not less than 90 miners' inches to a tank on Section 14 no later than the 1st of December of the current year, against a payment already advanced of $4,200, with a forfeiture of the whole of it, plus damages upon failure. It was signed by Cyrus Vane, President. Cottrell held it up so the windows could see it. Your Honor, the respondent has filed a sworn claim that he first appropriated this water in March of that year. Here is what he was actually doing in March of that year. He was selling it. He had not seen it, he had not measured it, and he did not know whose land it stood on, because he was at that same hour paying a survey crew to go find out. Kell said, Mr. Vane, stand up. Vane stood up. He was, Hattie had to give him this, absolutely steady. He stood there in a good coat in front of 211 people, and he did not sweat and he did not stammer. Your Honor, a commercial agreement made in good faith. Mr. Vane, I've been on this bench 19 years and I've been lied to by better men than you'll ever be, and I'd take it as a courtesy if you didn't start now. Kell picked up the recorder's page. Sit down. Mr. Mies, is your client prepared to withdraw the filing of the 2nd of October? Mies looked at Vane. Vane looked at nothing at all. He is, Your Honor. Then he's withdrawn it. The petition for injunction is granted. The sheriff's sale set for the 22nd is enjoined pending trial of the note, and I'll say for the benefit of anybody who is thinking of bidding that on this record, I would not let that note pass to first-year clerk. He set the page down. And Mr. Cottrell, you'll prepare an order referring the matter of the recorder's book, the county vouchers, and the promissory note to the Attorney General of this state, because I have got no confidence whatsoever in the officers of this county, and I'll say so in writing. The noise from the windows went down the street. It did not end there because these things do not end in a morning. It took 8 more months, and it was tedious and expensive, and Hattie learned more about affidavits than any woman ought to have to know. But it ended. Tuck Mallory resigned in December and told the statesman everything he had ever done in 9 years. In exchange for not going to the penitentiary, and what he had to say ran to 40 pages and named 11 properties. Harlan Pell was indicted in February and pleaded to the alteration of a public record in April and served 2 years, and never said one word about Vane. And Hattie never entirely understood why until Belle Pruitt told her that Pell's wife had been an association bookkeeper and had died owing them money. The Northern Plains and Sabine declared the association in default on the 1st of December and sued for the $4,200 and damages, and there was no water at Section 14 and never had been. The association's paper came due all in the same season the way it does, when the men who've been rolling it over stop answering letters. Cobb's note was bought at auction by a bank and sublet at 40 cents on the dollar, and so was Ferris's, and so were 9 others. And every one of those men paid off a smaller debt to a stranger than the one they'd owed to a neighbor. Cyrus Vane was removed from office in March by a vote of the commissioners, two of whom had voted him in without a word a year before, and both of whom made speeches about it. He was never tried for the note. The county attorney who would have had to try it was his own brother-in-law, and by the time the state got around to it, the man had gone to Oregon, and the file went cold the way files do. Hattie found she minded that less than she'd expected. He came through Dry Creek once more, in the summer, on his way somewhere, and he stopped his buggy on the road above her place and looked down at it for a while. She was at the head gate with a shovel. She saw him, and he saw her, and neither of them raised a hand, and after a minute he drove on, and that was the last time Hattie Boone ever laid eyes on the man. What she remembered about the whole business afterward was not the courtroom. It was the afternoon in April when the state's man finished taking her statement and packed his case and left. And she came out on the porch and sat down on the step because her knees had gone. And Ronan rolled out and stopped beside her, and neither of them said anything for about 10 minutes. Then he said, "You know what we've got now? A section of grass. A section of grass with the only certain water in this county on it, in a country where 4 families have already come around asking whether they can buy a share." He was looking out at the draw. "That's not a ranch anymore, Mrs. Boone. That's a business. And you're going to have to decide what kind, because the man who used to decide such things around here is gone, and everybody's going to be looking at whoever's standing where he was standing." Hattie sat on her own step with her hands hanging between her knees. "I don't want to be that," she said. "I know you don't. That's the only reason you'd be any good at it." "That's a poor argument." "It's the best one there is," said Ronan Blackridge, "and I'd like it noted that I made it sitting down. She decided badly the first time, which is worth saying, because people who tell this story in Sabine County tend to leave that part out. 4 families came in June and asked to buy a share of the water, and Hattie let all 4 of them onto the line at the same price on a handshake. And by the end of July, she had 94 inches promised in 5 directions and a stock pond that dropped 4 feet in 9 days. Vaughn accused Dolan of running his gate open at night. Dolan accused Ada Kittredge of the same thing. There was a fight at the Mercantile that put a man's tooth on the floor, and Hattie sat at her kitchen table that night with her head in her hands and said, "I've made a vein of myself in 6 weeks." "You've made a mess of yourself in 6 weeks," Ronan said. "Those aren't the same. Vane knew what he was doing." "That's supposed to comfort me?" "No, it's supposed to be accurate. You gave everybody the same thing because you couldn't stand to tell anybody no, and now they're at each other's throats. And that's not corruption, Mrs. Boone. That's cowardice dressed up as kindness." She lifted her head. "You don't pull much. You've been laughed at your whole life, and you'd rather be robbed than disliked. I've watched it since June." He rolled to the table. "Now, do you want me to be gentle about it, or do you want the water sorted before September?" "Sort the water." They sorted the water. It took 11 days, and it was ugly, and the thing that finally worked was Ronan's, and it came out of the same place all his ideas came out of, which was a stubborn refusal to argue about anything that could be measured instead. He built a second weir at the head of the ditch, above the splits, with a graduated stick set in it and a lid that locked. Every user got a share written in inches, not in promises. Every share was written on paper, filed at the county seat, dated, and posted on the wall of the Mercantile where any man could go read what his neighbor was entitled to. Every gate had a lock, and Hattie kept the keys, and every gate got opened on a schedule that ran on a clock, and the schedule was posted too. And the part that nobody expected, every user, once a month, was to walk the line with her, not to inspect it, to help clean it. "They won't do it," Hattie said. "They'll do it if it's in the paper they signed. They'll hate it." "They'll hate it in April and they'll be proud of it in August," Ronan said. "And by the second year they'll be telling people it was their idea. That's how it goes with work. Nobody ever loves it going in." He was right about that, though it took 3 years and not 2. The Kittredge girls grew up walking that ditch every first Saturday with a shovel, and the middle one, Nella, turned out to have the same eye for grade her mother had for weather, and at 17 she could set a level better than any man Ronan ever taught. But that was later. The nearer thing was the winter, and the winter was hard. Ronan's sore closed in November and opened again in January, and this time it went deeper and it went septic, and there were 5 days in February when Dr. Shrike came out every morning, and Belle Pruitt did not go to bed at all, and Hattie sat in the chair by that bed with the lamp turned low, and watched a man who had dragged himself 4 miles on his hands lie perfectly still and burn.
On the third night, he came up out of it enough to talk, and what he said was, "You should have left me at the creek crossing. Don't. It's arithmetic."
You'd have a section, a spring, and no ledger of what it cost. Mr. Blackridge? Hattie. It was the first time he'd used her name. She'd known him 18 months. I've done the arithmetic every week since July, and it comes out the same every time, and I've never once said it out loud, so let me say it and then I'll sleep. You are running yourself into the ground for a man who is going to keep costing you more and giving you less, and there is no year coming where that turns around. Hattie sat there in the lamplight with a cloth in her hands. Are you finished? That's the whole of it. Then here's mine, and it's shorter. She wrung the cloth out. 2 Aprils before you came, I sat at that table and thought about lying down in the north draw, and what stopped me was a cow bawling. A cow. That's what my life was worth to me that night. One animal that needed something. And I have thought about that a great deal since, and I've come to the view that I had it backward. It wasn't that the cow needed me. It's that I needed something that needed me. She put the cloth on his forehead. You're a good deal more use than the cow, and considerably worse company, and I'm not doing arithmetic. Go to sleep. He went to sleep. He didn't die. The fever broke on the 6th day, and he was 3 weeks getting his strength back, and he never got all of it. And from that winter on, he was smaller in some way that had nothing to do with size. He tired earlier. He needed the 4 hours off the hip that Shrike had ordered 18 months before. And he took them, finally, because the fever had frightened him in a way nothing else had managed to. And in the middle of that same February, with Ronan half dead in the back room, the first of the letters came. It was from a man in Bellefonte named Ives, who had lost both legs to a threshing machine, and it was 4 lines long, and it said he had heard there was a fellow out at Dry Creek who'd built a pump a man could run sitting down, and would that fellow write and say how? Hattie read it out loud to him when he was well enough to hear it. He didn't answer for a while. Write him, he said. Say what? Say I'll draw it. Say it'll be ugly, and say the first one he builds will fail, and say to build it anyway. He was looking at the ceiling. And ask him what his kitchen looks like. Height of the counter, height of the stove, where the door sills are, what he can reach sitting. Every man's different, and everybody who's ever built for us has built for a man standing. She wrote it. Ives wrote back. Then a woman in Pryor whose husband had been kicked by a horse and hadn't walked since. Then a man from a mining camp in the Bitterroots with one hand. Then a great many others over years, a slow, steady, entirely unglamorous correspondence that Hattie kept in a crate and later in 3 crates, and that consisted almost entirely of measurements. That was the shape of the thing. There was never a moment where a bell rang, and Ronan Blackridge became famous. There was a man in a back room with a board and a pencil and a stack of letters. And there was a woman who wrote the fair copies because his hand cramped after an hour. And there were, eventually, a good many pumps and gates and slings and low-set forges scattered across 4 states that all shared a family resemblance and none of which had his name on them anywhere. He never took a patent. Hattie pushed him on it twice. A patent's a fence, he said. I'd have to sue a man in Pryor to keep it up. You could be paid. I could be paid. And then a man who's already lost his legs pays me for the privilege of hauling his own water. He shook his head. No, charge them postage. She thought that was foolish and said so, and she was right in the narrow sense because there was a firm in Omaha that made the rocker pump for 11 years and sold a great many and paid them nothing. But she came to see the other side of it too, which was that a thing nobody owns spreads faster, and that by the time she was 50 she could not go into a hardware store in that part of the country without seeing a piece of Ronan's thinking bolted onto somebody else's iron. They were married in the spring of the 4th year, in the kitchen, by a circuit judge named Kell, who had grown fond of both of them in a courtroom and drove out on his own time to do it. There were 11 people in the room. Belle Pruitt cried. Wesley Ott, who by then was county recorder and had held that office through 2 elections, stood up in a coat that didn't fit and got through about 4 words of a prepared remark before he had to sit back down. Teal brought a keg and a broken arm that had healed crooked and would trouble him the rest of his life. There was no proposal, exactly. There'd been a conversation on the porch in March that went, in its entirety, Belle's asked me twice this month whether we're going to. Whether we're going to what? You know what. I do. A long pause, and the sound of the crank turning a quarter and back. I've not said anything because I can't stand up and I can't get down on a knee, and I'd sooner not do a thing badly in front of you that other men do easily. You've done 9 things badly in front of me. One of them hit me in the head. That's a fair point. Then ask. Will you marry me, Hattie? Yes. That was quick. I've had 4 years to think about it, Hattie Boone said, and about 2 of them were spent waiting for you to work out that I'd say yes. It was not a smooth marriage, and neither of them expected one. They fought about money, which they never had enough of even after the water sold well, because Hattie kept letting people onto the line at rates that didn't cover the cost of maintaining it, and Ronan kept telling her she was doing it again, and she kept doing it. They fought about the letters, because he'd work at them till 2 in the morning and then be no good the next day, and she'd have to do everything twice. They fought about his hip, endlessly, for 11 years, the same fight with different weather in it. They had one fight in the 6th year that was bad enough that she slept in the barn, and neither of them ever told anybody what it was about, and it was this. He had said, in the middle of an argument about nothing, that she'd only kept him because a woman who's been laughed at needs somebody in the house who's worse off. And she had gone out and slept in the barn, and he had lain awake all night in a bed. He could not get out of alone, unable to go after her, which was a punishment neither of them had designed and both of them understood. She came in at 5 in the morning and put the coffee on and said, "Say the true thing." And he said, "I'm afraid you'll wake up one day and see the arithmetic." And she said, "I see it every day. I've seen it every day since Founders Day. That's not a thing you get to be afraid of anymore, Ronan. You'll have to find another one." They never got a child. Hattie was 43 by the time they married, and she'd never carried one in 14 years with Elias either, and she'd made her peace with that a long while before, mostly. There was an afternoon in the 8th year when Ada Kittredge's Nella, then about 12, fell asleep against Hattie's side on the porch waiting out a storm, and Hattie sat perfectly still for 2 hours so as not to wake her, and Ronan watched from the doorway and said nothing at all about it, then or ever, which was the kindest thing he did in his life. The place changed slowly, the way places do when there's no money to change them fast. The barn got a new roof in the 5th year, and a second barn went up in the 9th. The house grew a room, then 2, then a wing that was frankly ugly, and that Ronan designed himself with doorways 40 inches wide and no threshold anywhere in it, so that a man on a sled could get from any part of that house to any other part without asking a living soul for help. There was a ramp to the porch by the 6th year, and a second one to the shed in a graded track, packed gravel, crowned to shed water, running from the house to the barn to the head gate, a quarter mile of it, that took 2 summers to build, and that Hattie thought at the time was an extravagance, and later called the best money they ever spent. The porch came in the 11th year, and the porch was the one thing he built entirely for her. He'd measured her once, in a doorway, for a wire line. He measured her again, without telling her why. And he built a porch with a bench at a height that let a heavy woman with bad knees sit down and get up without putting a hand on anything, and with a rail at the right place for the times when she wanted one, and wide enough that neither of them ever had to move to let the other by. She caught on about halfway through the framing. "This is for me. It's for the house." "Ronan." "It's for you," he said, and went on cutting. They took people in. That started by accident, the way it does, and then it stopped being an accident. The first was a man named Tolliver, who came through in the 7th year looking for work with a bad shoulder and no references, and stayed 9 years. Then it was Ada Kittredge's oldest boy for a season, and then a woman named Marguerite Sowerby, a granddaughter of the old man whose seep the association had taken years before, who arrived from Kansas with a satchel and a chip on her shoulder the size of a fence post, and who ran the whole cattle side of the operation by the time she was 30. And then it was Sheriff Tuck Mallory, which nobody in the county could believe. He came out in the 9th year. He'd done no time. He'd told the state everything, and they'd kept their end of it. But he'd lost the office and the pension and every friend he had, and he was working at a livery in Sublette for $1 a day at the age of 58, and he stood in the yard with his hat in his hands and could not get a sentence out. Hattie let him stand there. "You witnessed a note on a dead man," she said. "I did." "You witnessed a mark I never made." "I did." "You held a hat at Founders Day and you would not look at me." "I've thought about that more than the rest of it put together," Mallory said. "I don't know why. It's the smallest thing I did." Hattie stood on her own porch a long time. "There's a bunkhouse," she said. "There's work. The pay's poor. and you'll take orders from Marguerite Sowerby, and she'll enjoy giving them to you. And I'll tell you plain that I don't forgive you, and I don't expect I will." "That's fair." "It's not fair, it's just true." She turned to go in. "Come to supper at 6. We eat at the table." Ronan asked her about it that night. "You're a softer woman than you let on." "I'm not soft, I'm practical." She was banking the fire. "That man knows where 11 properties went and who signed what. He's a walking record. And in about 9 years, he'll be too old to work and somebody will have to bury him, and I'd rather it was somebody who knows what he did than somebody who doesn't." "That's the coldest kind thing I ever heard." "I've had a hard education." The thing she never entirely got over was the town. Dry Creek changed. It changed a great deal. Cobb ran for the commission and won and served 14 years and was honest about 90% of the time, which in that country was a record. Odell Ferris paid off his note to the bank and sublet and put a plank sidewalk in front of the Mercantile with his own money and never once mentioned Founder's Day to Hattie in 26 years, though he sent a wagon out every winter with things she hadn't ordered and wouldn't take payment for. But she never went to another Founder's Day, not once. 26 years of invitations, including 4 from the commission and 2 that were engraved. Ronan asked her about it in the 14th year. "They'd have you up on the platform." "I know they would. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point." She was shelling peas. "I stood in front of those people once and they made a sound, Ronan. I'm not going back up there to hear a different sound out of the same throats. It wouldn't mean anything. Half those men would be clapping for the water. Some of them wouldn't." "Some of them wouldn't," she agreed. "And I'd never know which ones, and I'd stand up there trying to work it out, and I'd come home and not sleep. So no." "That's not forgiveness." "No, it isn't," Hattie said. "I've never claimed it. I fed half that town and sold water to the other half, and I'd pull any one of them out of a fire tomorrow, and I have not forgiven a single one of them, and I've decided a person can live a whole good life like that. The books don't have to balance, they just have to be honest." He thought about that for a while. "You're harder than me," he said. "I'm harder than anybody. You just knew me after." Ronan Blackridge died in the spring of the 22nd year, at the age of 68, which was 13 more than Dr. Shrike had given him and 18 more than Cyrus Vane had. It was pneumonia, and it was quick, about 9 days, and the last 4 of them he was mostly not there. Hattie sat with him. Belle Pruitt had died 6 years before and Marguerite Sowerby ran the place, and Nella Kittredge, 29 years old and the best hand with a level in 4 counties, sat up 2 of the nights so Hattie could sleep. On the 5th day he was clear for about an hour. "How's the North Line?" "It's fine." "You'd say that anyway." "I would," Hattie said, "but it's also fine." He lay there. "I want to say something and I've been putting it off about 20 years. Say it. That day. On the boards." He had to stop and breathe. "When you came down that lane and I saw you coming, I thought, here comes another one. Somebody's charity. And I was already deciding how I'd make it so unpleasant she'd have me out inside a month." His hand moved on the blanket. "I want you to know I thought that. Because everybody in 3 counties has spent 20 years saying you saved me and I let them say it. And the truth is, I meant to be a plague to you, and I very nearly was, for about the first 8 months." "You were," Hattie said. "I know it. You threw a piece of iron across the shed. I remember. You told me you had a razor. I remember that too. That was the worst thing I ever did to you, and I've never apologized for it, because I was afraid if I brought it up, you'd have to think about it again." He turned his head. "I'm sorry." "I know. That's not the same as saying it's all right." "No," Hattie said. "It isn't." He was quiet a bit. "The porch," he said. "What about it? Is the bench still the right height?" "It's exactly the right height. It's been the right height for 11 years. "That's the only thing I ever built that came out right the first time," Ronan Blackridge said. "Everything else failed twice." She buried him on the rise above the north draw, where a man could have seen the ditch running if a man could have seen anything, and there were 200 people at it, and some of them had laughed at Founder's Day, and some of them hadn't, and Hattie found she didn't care that day, which was the closest she ever came. The stone said his name and the years and one line underneath that she chose herself, and that a great many people asked her about over the following years, and that she never once explained he was not finished. She lived another 19 years. She was by any measure anybody in that country used, a rich woman by the end, not railroad rich, not town rich, but a woman with 311 head, water rights that had survived 4 court challenges, 140 shareholders on the Boone Ditch Company, and a house that was full more often than it wasn't. Her knees gave out at 64 and she used 2 canes and then a chair of her own, one that Nella Kittredge built off Ronan's drawings with the crank moved to the left side because Hattie's right shoulder had gone. She was, people who knew her said, not a particularly warm woman. She was fair, and she was blunt, and she paid on time, and she had a way of asking a question twice that made men nervous. She hired people nobody else would hire, and she did not make speeches about it, and she fired 2 of them, hard, when they stole from her. She never lost the weight. That's worth saying too, because there's a version of this story people started telling in Sabine County about 20 years on in which the widow Boone worked herself down to nothing and became handsome in her old age. And it isn't true. She was a heavy woman at 11 and a heavy woman at 79. Her knees hurt every day of her adult life. She could not ride a horse after 55, and she used a mounting block and a wagon and eventually the chair, and she was tired in a way that some people are just tired, all the time, forever. What changed was not her body. What changed was that at 41 she had lived in a country where every single day required her to explain, apologize for, or work twice as hard to overcome the fact of her own body. And by 60 she lived in a country where nobody thought about it at all because there were more interesting things about her to think about. That's the whole of it, and it took 20 years and it did not come free. Nella Kittredge asked her about it once, near the end. Hattie was 78 and mostly in the chair, and they were on the porch, on the bench that was still exactly the right height. And Nella said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't walked down that lane?" Every week for 40 years. And I don't think I was brave, Hattie said. People say that, and it's not so. I was so used to being humiliated that one more didn't frighten me the way it should have. That's not courage, Nella. That's callous. She looked out at the fields. The brave thing came later, and it was smaller than anybody thinks. It was about 11 months after, at that kitchen table, with $211 in front of me, and a man telling me he couldn't promise it'd work. That's the day. Everything else was just the day I was already having. Most people wouldn't have spent it. Most people would have been sensible, Hattie said, and most people would have been right, and I want that understood because there's about 100 women in this state who did the sensible thing and took the $300, and there's nothing wrong with them. I got lucky. I had a spring that didn't quit, and a drought that made it matter, and a clerk who was ashamed of himself at exactly the right moment, and a freighter who couldn't be bothered to clean out his wagon. She shifted her weight, which took a while. If Teal had thrown that satchel in a stove, I'd have lost the place in November and nobody would tell this story at all. People forget that part. They want the lesson to be that hard work wins. Hard work is the price of the ticket. It's not the ticket. Then what is? Hattie thought about it a long while. 2 things, she said. First is you have to keep sweeping the yard, not because it helps. It doesn't help. But because on the day somebody finally does come down your road, they'll look at that yard and know something about you in about 4 seconds that would take you a year to say out loud, and it'll be the truth. And the second? The second is that everybody in this world is looking for somebody who will be honest with them, and almost nobody is because it costs too much. She folded her hands. That's what he was, that man. He was rude, and he was proud, and he was wrong about a great deal, and he never once in 22 years told me a thing was fine when it wasn't. Not the barn, not the ditch, not my own foolishness, not himself. Do you know how rare that is? In a whole life? One person who'll tell you the true thing and then stay in the room while you're angry about it? Nella didn't answer. They called it a joke, Hattie said. That's what stayed with me longest, not the laughing. The word. Cyrus Vane stood on a wagon and handed me a man and called it a joke. And what he meant was that neither one of us was a real person, so it couldn't be cruelty, only comedy. She shook her head slowly. And the strange part, the part I've never been able to explain to anybody without sounding like I've made peace with something I haven't, is that he was the only man in that town who ever put the 2 of us in a room together. Every decent person in Dry Creek looked at me for 30 years and thought, poor Hattie. Every one of them looked at him and thought, poor devil. Not one of them ever once thought to introduce us. It took a man who despised us both to do that, and he did it for sport, and it worked out, and I have never known what to do with that. 26 years and I still don't. The wind came up off the draw. So what do you tell people? Nella said. I don't tell people anything. They've got the story they like. Hattie leaned back against the rail that was in exactly the right place. But I'll tell you, since you're the one who'll be sitting on this porch after me, the world will hand you a thing it thinks is worthless and laugh while it does it. That happens. That's ordinary. What's not ordinary is what you do in the next 4 seconds, and I'll tell you what I did, and it wasn't noble. I looked at a bleeding man on a set of boards who wasn't laughing, and I thought, if he can hold still, I can walk, that's all. One person not laughing was enough to get me down that lane. She turned her head. So be that. Not the hero of it, just the one who doesn't laugh. You'll never know what it costs somebody else to see you, and you'll never know what they'll build with it. Hattie Boone died in her sleep in the winter of her 80th year, in the room with the 40-inch doorway, and the ranch went to the Kittredge girl and the Sowerby woman jointly, which surprised nobody who knew her and scandalized several people who didn't. The Boone Ditch Company is still there in this telling. The gates still get walked the first Saturday of the month by whoever's drawing off the line, and there are people doing it now whose grandparents did it, and about half of them have no idea why it's done that way. Travelers on that road stop sometimes, when the grass is up and the water's running, and ask who built all this. And the answer they get, if they get one at all, is the answer people in that country settled on a long time ago and never bothered to improve, because it was accurate and it was short and it did the thing the truth is supposed to do, which is fit. A woman nobody wanted and a man nobody could use in about 40 years.